Chapter 29:57. Meanwhile, Yi Qian had already entered the metal ring target. The metal ring was hanging from a climbing rope. Although it had a certain weight, the rain and wind blowing through the swamp made the metal ring vibrate slightly, which undoubtedly increased the difficulty. Some of the snipers were even cursing under their breath. That was because the difficulty was too high. The bullet had to pass through the metal ring. It could not break the metal ring or break the rope. Once it was broken, there would be no way to use the rope to get out of the swamp. The rope and metal ring were all auxiliary tools for getting out of the swamp. If one was damaged, there would be no end of trouble. This increased the psychological pressure on the snipers. God, this is too difficult. It's still moving. God damn it. How do I make the bullet pass through the metal ring? These rules are too harsh. Without wind and rain, I'm confident that I can make the bullet pass through the center of the ring. But now the wind and rain are making the metal ring vibrate. There's no way to aim at it. All the parameters have changed. I need some time to calm down. Before I can complete it. No, buddy, we don't have that much time for you to calm down. We need to hurry up and get out of here. Don't forget that we still have the second competition zone. There was a very short exchange between the participants from each country. They were all stumped by the difficulty of the metal ring. It was indeed very difficult. When Yi Qian saw it during the day, he already knew how difficult it was. It could be said that it was actually something that was almost impossible to complete. It was fine if the target was fixed, but if the target was not fixed, even if the parameters were adjusted and the angle was right, once the erratic wind blew through and the metal ring vibrated, everything would be for naught. In the past, Uncle Chun had taught her that the best opportunity for a sniper was at night. It concealed the sniper and also concealed the danger. He had also told her that a sniper who was completely focused on training during the day would not be able to achieve anything in a night battle. Not only that, even surviving would be a problem. So, half of her sniping training was spent at night. Especially after learning from the Delta Force training, she would do night sniping training when she left school at night. Rain or shine, she never stopped. She had trained with metal rings before, and the results of her training were not bad. However, the metal rings she had trained with were heavier than the ones in front of her, so they would not vibrate easily in the wind and rain. Encountering a new challenge, even Yi Qian's eyes were a little different. At this moment, they were shining. Her dark eyes were full of interest for the new challenge. After calculating the fixed shots given by the rules of the competition, Yi Qian was just about to use the stand to fix the sniper rifle when Xia Jinyuan, who had been following beside him, said calmly, "The stand is not enough for balance. Put it on me to improve the balance." It was indeed a good choice. Yi Qian nodded and asked him, "What position are you used to?" "Anything is fine, but it's best to use this posture here." As Xia Jinyuan spoke, he stood in front of Yi Qian, who was half squatting. Then, he turned his body to the left and knelt with his knees facing forward. With his hands behind his head, he looked like a sleeping baby. He used his waist to help Yi Qian balance the sniper rifle. Yi Qian placed the sniper rifle's balance stand on his strong waist and started to set the parameters of the sniper rifle. The metal rings are a little difficult. Calm down and complete the sniping. When the sniper rifle was placed on the stand, Xia Jinyuan said calmly, "There are only a few sporadic gunshots right now. We're still in the middle of the previous round of sniping targets. The metal rings and shell targets have not started yet. For this round, you don't have to wait for the other country's snipers to shoot. When you think you can shoot, just shoot." Chapter 29:58. It wasn't a fixed target. As long as she thought it was time to shoot, she had to shoot. She couldn't wait to shoot in case she missed the opportunity. This time, Yi Qian wasn't going to wait for anyone else. After training for so many years, she was drenched in mud on rainy days and drenched in sweat on sunny days. This was a good opportunity to test her professional skills. The metal ring trembled slightly from the rain and wind. Slowly, the metal ring seemed to be magnified and branded into her heart. Just like every time she held the gun, she had already aimed at the target in her heart. Proofread, adjust, zoom in on the target. Aim. Very good. The crosshairs were on the target. Fine adjustments. Fine adjustments. The metal ring trembled slightly. Raindrops dripped onto the metal ring, splashing into her heart. She could clearly see tiny raindrops blooming. The blooming raindrops were sparkling and translucent like shattered crystals. They were beautiful and easy to break. Yi Qian seemed to see another world through her night vision. It was a world of sniping that belonged to her. Wherever she aimed her gun, that was where she could shoot. The hole in the middle of the metal ring became clearer and clearer. The wind seemed to have stopped, and the rain seemed to have stopped as well. Yi Qian's slender finger gently rested on the trigger. Then, the corners of her mouth curled up into a faint smile. His finger that was hooked on the trigger pressed down, bang, the gunshot rang out. The bullet was squeezed out of the barrel by the high pressure. It tore through the air and flew toward the metal ring. The bullet shattered the raindrops. The trajectory left behind by the bullet cut through the air and the raindrops as if they were solid objects. The recoil of the sniper rifle caused Yi Qian's shoulder to lean back a little. It also caused Xia Jinyuan, who was acting as a counterbalance, to feel as if something was hammering his waist. This was the power of a bullet. It was also the strength of an excellent sniper. Once the target was aimed, she immediately fired. The bullet passed through the metal ring and passed right through the center. The force of the bullet passing through made the metal ring tremble even more violently. The infrared device was activated. The metal ring's sniper target was completed. Yi Qian removed the heavy sniper rifle from Xia Jinyuan's body. Drenched by the rain, her delicate lips were slightly cold. She gently pursed her lips and said calmly, "Hit." He put away his spear and stood up. In the darkness, a slender figure stood as straight as a pine tree. Her bright and confident eyes sparkled as she stared ahead. At that moment, the light seemed to be with her. No matter how dark the night was, one could still see her proud figure clearly. Not bad. Xia Jinyuan's dark eyes narrowed as he praised her with a smile. Not bad at all. To be able to hit the metal hoop in such an environment was pretty good. Li Jinyan had been waiting for Yi Qian's news. When he heard the word "fated," his cold face immediately broke into a smile that was like the spring breeze in March. With Yi Qian taking down the hardest metal ring in the first shooting zone, the morale of the Chinese team reached a new peak. G3, who had been silent all this time, finally opened their mouths. They knew how difficult the target was, so they didn't dare to say anything before the competition. They didn't even dare to say a word of encouragement. That was because the sniper needed to be absolutely calm at this time. He had to clear out all the messy thoughts in his mind and heart. He had to reach a state where only the sniper, the gun, and the target existed. Only then would he be able to complete the match better. Sometimes, words of encouragement would actually increase the pressure on the team members. Chapter 2959. You're amazing, our female soldier. I really want to give you a warm hug right now. G3's gritty voice had a deep smile to it. His joy was beyond words. Can I be crowned as the gun king? I really think I can be crowned king. That's amazing. I've shot metal targets before, but they're all fixed targets. I haven't even tried this kind of suspended target before. Captain, when we get back, we should start training on suspended metal targets. The T6 combatant had nothing but admiration for Yi Qian. He even wanted to put Yi Qian on a pedestal. Crown King, I've already taken the first step. There's no hurry. It hasn't even been 6 years since I agreed to meet Yi Qian. Xia Jinyuan thought, with a smirk on his face. Young Sparrowhawk was already very tempted. Qing Yao would definitely be assigned to the Snowfield Brigade in the future. So which team would she be assigned to? The Snowfield Brigade was divided into 2 teams. The Shadow Assault Team, which was designated by the Chinese code name, and the Assault Team, which was designated by the Chinese code name. Wouldn't Qing Niao be assigned to the Shadow Assault Team? If that was really the case, young Sparrowhawk couldn't help but rub his hands together. Ha 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 ha. After the competition ended, he would have to have a heart-to-heart talk with the captain and sound him out. While the Chinese team members were happy that they had achieved victory in this round's sniping target, the referees were already in an uproar. When the Chinese team's results were displayed, The referees and military officials who had been staring at the Chinese team's results were stunned for at least a minute. Then they looked at each other with shock in their eyes. The Chinese team has completed a metal ring sniping target. The bullet has successfully penetrated the metal ring. Score. Perhaps it was because they were too surprised, or perhaps they had never expected the Chinese team to be the first to take down the most difficult suspended metal ring target. But when the referee in charge of the Chinese team's results spoke, his voice sounded a little shaky. It was simply unbelievable. Too surprising. Too surprising. The Chinese team was actually the first to take down the suspended metal ring target. Very quickly, the referees displayed the data on the screen in front of the officers of the observation team. On the 42-inch screen, the Chinese team's sniping score popped up. When the score appeared, it suddenly jumped up to first place in the sniping competition. The generals of the observation group held their breaths. The commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force asked the referee, "What's the third target?" China's third sniper target is a metal ring target, completed by China's female soldier Y8. When the referee's reply was heard, the generals of the observation group gasped. It was very, very obvious. All the generals could clearly hear the gasps around them. The Chinese side has completed the most difficult target in the first sniping zone. It was the female soldier who shocked us. Generals, the female soldier sent by the Chinese side has better shooting skills than the male soldiers. The commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force said in a deep voice, "I think no one has the right to doubt China's strength anymore. Their female soldiers have proven a miracle with their strength and shocked us again and again with their strength. This is the strength of China. There is nothing to doubt." The Chinese team members didn't rely on luck to increase their ranking step by step. Every soldier used their own strength to fight for the glory of their country. When the commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force spoke, his gaze subconsciously swept past Senior Colonel Amitabhu's face, whose face had turned the color of pig liver. Senior Colonel Amitabhu, who had received the Chinese team's results and wanted to say, "That's impossible," was so angry that he could only be angry at himself. He had never seen them take the initiative to stir up trouble, nor had he seen them make things difficult for other countries. All he had seen was their low-key, reserved, and unobtrusive side. No one doubted the Chinese side's strength anymore, and no one doubted whether the Chinese side had faked their results. From the beginning until now, the Chinese Special Forces had maintained a polite side and did not make excessive demands of the SFS Border Defense Forces. Chapter 2961. Even when the SFS Border Defense Army deliberately made things difficult for them, saying that the bags were lighter, they didn't stand up against the SFS Border Defense Army, nor did they say anything unpleasant. They immediately went through the referees and military officials. Their principles and stance were quite clear. The other country didn't have any evidence. They only suspected that the Chinese team members' bags were lighter. This action already contained the intention of humiliating them. In the end, when the SFS Border Defense Army became aggressive, the anger on the faces of the Chinese team members could also be seen. In this kind of situation, if it were the special forces of another country, they would directly greet the SFS Border Defense Army with their fists and force them to behave. But the Chinese special forces didn't. No matter how angry they didn't want to make things worse. While using powerful words to defend their dignity, they also used the most correct method to fight back against the SFS Border Defense Army. When the referees and military officials confirmed that the bags weren't lighter and the SFS Border Defense Army had nothing to say, they let the participants and generals of all countries know of the SFS Border Defense Army's rudeness. They didn't say too much, they didn't explain too much, they only used the most direct and effective action to defend their dignity, and also gave the SFS Border Defense Army an invisible punch. In the face of the rudeness of the rudeness of the rudeness, from the last time no one stood up to defend the Chinese team, to now the generals of several countries stood up to defend them. When General Kallisler's gaze fell on the bright red flag of the Chinese team, the contemplation in his eyes deepened a little. When he returned, he needed to seriously report to the president on the Chinese team's performance in the Ica assault. Colonel Amitabu, who was criticized by the generals of several countries, kept his chin up, thinking that he didn't do anything wrong. Of course, he didn't ask General Kallisler to apologize to him or anything like that. Our country's participants will use their strength to tell the Chinese team that they will never surpass us. This was the last sentence Colonel Amitabu said before he gave up on arguing. His voice was powerful and full of confidence. Such confidence in exchange for a faint smile from General Kallisler and some of the other generals. Let them continue to be so confident, don't cry when they go back to their parents. I can't understand his confidence. No, it's not confidence, it's arrogance. What kind of strength do they have to look down on the Chinese team members again and again? In my eyes, I think the Chinese team members are more capable than them. They think they're the best in Asia, so they look down on China so much. The real best in Asia is not what they think, but what the whole world recognizes. The Chinese Special Forces are very outstanding. I like how reserved they are and how polite they are. As for the SFS Border Defense Corps, I no longer have much interest in watching their matches. The hushed discussion did not escape Colonel Amitabu's ears, and he did not care how Colonel Amitabu would react if he heard it. The colonel's confidence was not something that could be defeated with a few words. Perhaps he was still thinking that he had to teach everyone a lesson later. The SFS Border Defense Army had successfully attracted the disgust of the generals of some countries, while the Chinese Special Forces, who were participating for the first time, had used their own methods to gain the favor of the generals of various countries. Even someone as arrogant as General Haywill had to admit that from a personal point of view, he preferred the humble and polite Chinese contestants who knew how to use better methods to earn respect. Chapter 2962. General, you need to remain silent. You can't speak up for Colonel Amitabu anymore. His behavior is really disgusting. I really don't like his high profile, the senior colonel said in a low voice. Occasionally, he would glance at Colonel Amitabu, who was at the center of the controversy. His eyes were filled with deep disapproval. He is very arrogant. He is arrogant in their country. Their soldiers are the best. He doesn't even care about our country and our soldiers. Naturally, General Haywill would listen to his subordinate's words. He said calmly, "They have always been as confident as they are today. From a media to their country, they're full of strong confidence. And this confidence is built on their own self-righteousness. It's good to let them continue like this. It's also good to maintain the current relationship with China. It won't affect us much." Colonel Amitabu had successfully caused dissatisfaction among the generals of various countries. It was not the right time for him to speak up for him. General Haywill, who pretended not to pay attention, analyzed the results of the American team with the senior colonel accompanying him. It was 7 o'clock local time. The temperature in the forest was getting lower and lower. The gunshots in the 1st District seemed to have stopped for a long time. It was so quiet that the cold air seemed to have frozen. It was suffocating. Sharuk's line of sight was aimed at the metal ring target that was gently swaying in the wind and rain. His eyes were faintly painful. They were probably inflamed from being soaked in the rain for too long. Perhaps it was because of the discomfort in his eyes. Sharuk gently moved his finger away from the trigger of the sniper rifle several times. Then he raised his wet hand and rubbed his eyes hard. After he blinked hard, he felt that his eyes were much better. Then he continued to lean forward, aimed at the scope with one eye, adjusted it again, and prepared to snipe again. On the Chinese side, Li Jinyan began to shoot at the shell target. At a distance of 80 meters, he hit the ring on top of the large caliber shell. "Hold the gun steady. You just need to put the shell down." G3 half-squatted beside Li Jinyan's sniper rifle and gently put the last shell on top of the sniper rifle's muzzle. There were already 2 empty shells on top of the muzzle. If he added one more shell, there would be 3 shells. He really didn't expect the Demon King to have such a little hobby when sniping. He liked to stack bullet casings on the muzzle when he was stationary. This problem, well, it wasn't really a problem. It was a way to practice holding a gun in a stable sitting position. 3 bullet casings were stacked on top of each other above the muzzle. Within an hour, none of the bullet casings would fall off. Li Jinyan was also trained in the same way. After putting in the last shell, G3 made an okay gesture and slowly retreated to the back, quietly waiting for his teammate to finish sniping. When the sniper rifle was in Li Jinyan's hands, it was as if it had taken root. No matter how strong the wind and rain were, the rifle did not move, and neither did the cartridge case. He began the final adjustments and proofreading. He held the rifle with one hand and adjusted it with the other. The bullet shell on the barrel did not move at all, as if it had taken root in the sniper rifle and become one with it. In the night vision scope, the large caliber shell was 80 meters away. Li Jinyan's gaze was quite calm. There was not a trace of nervousness on his body. It was as if he was just doing ordinary sniping training. There was no psychological pressure at all. The crosshair had already been aimed at the position where the shell would hit. According to the wind speed and temperature, he made the appropriate adjustments and deviated. Then his slender fingers pulled the trigger without any hesitation, completing the sniping. Chapter 2963. The fact that Li Jinyan was able to become the captain of the Storm Commandos was proof of his outstanding ability. Back then, when he trained with Xia Jinyuan, the two kings did not see each other. Even after so many years had passed, the leaders who observed the performance of the two still remembered that ruthlessness. Xia Jinyuan was as solemn as Mount Tai and was full of unfathomable mysteries. He was sometimes ruffian, sometimes elegant, and when he needed to be ruthless, the leaders instantly liked him. Li Jinyan was as cold as a snowy mountain. He was filled with the ruthlessness that only a snowy mountain would have. No one dared to conquer or challenge him at will. The cold temperament on his body showed that he was capable of shouldering great responsibilities and could hold up a huge ship. Before the two of them finished their training, the leaders had discussed and quarreled countless times about where the two of them would go until Commander-in-Chief Xia came forward and said that Xia Jinyuan's goal was to join the Snowfield Brigade. Only then did the quarrel stop. One of them became the Navy and shouldered the heavy responsibility of organizing a brand new Navy Special Operations team. He built the Storm Commandos from scratch and now had a Special Operations team of 50 people. The other one became the Army and shouldered the responsibility of turning a veteran Special Operations team into a new Special Operations team that was in line with international standards. A few years had passed, and the two of them, who used to be the kings, did not see each other, had achieved excellent results, and were emitting unparalleled brilliance in their respective fields. The two of them went from initial competitors to comrades in arms who appreciated each other. Then, because of Yi Qian, they even became a family. It had to be said that Li Jinyan and Xia Jinyuan were also fated to be together. At this moment, Xia Jinyuan unilaterally cut off the communication with Li Jinyan and asked G3 directly, "How is it?" When he asked, Li Jinyan's slender finger happened to be on the trigger. After asking the question, Li Jinyan pressed down on the trigger. "It should be good, very stable." Amidst the gunshots, G3 answered Xia Jinyuan, "1 second ago, the shot was fired. I'm not 100% confident, but I'm still 99% confident. Just now, I saw that the vice captain has a habit of stacking 3 bullet casings on the muzzle when he snipes." Stacking 3 bullet casings on the muzzle? Xia Jinyuan seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of darkness flashed across his eyes. At the same time, he immediately resumed communication with Li Jinyan and waited for news from him. Hit! A second later, Li Jinyan's cold voice came through the earpiece. It was very calm, and it didn't sound like he had just finished a sniping competition. "I've never seen you make a mistake." His face. When Li Jinyan, who was about to come over, heard this, he replied indifferently. Just as his comrades thought he wouldn't say anything else, he added, "I'll never forget it in this lifetime." Li. In response, Li Jinyan's expression was so cold that it was as though he had just been fished out of an icy lake. He was still emitting gusts of cold air. "I won't give him a chance to speak again. Now, you won't give him a chance to speak again. You won't forget it for the rest of your life. Looks like you really intend to remember it for the rest of your life." Xiao Jinyuan followed closely behind Yi Qian as they walked out of the forest. Next up was the broken blade target. They had to readjust the distance between them. Their comrades had yet to celebrate when they were confused by the conversation between the two of them. They had no idea what the two of them were talking about at all. Thus, he simply remained silent and listened to the two of them talk back and forth. Chapter 2964. Yi Qian also listened quietly. Perhaps it was because she was a female soldier, but she could vaguely feel the coldness in their words. What the foreign sniper instructor had said. For Xiao Chuidong's brother to remember it for so many years, it was obvious that it was not something good. The country was poor and had no status. How many countries in the past would have looked up to them? Not many. Therefore, their country had always been working hard. Only when the country was strong and the people were rich would there be a place for them. This had been the case since ancient times, not to mention when the military was modernized. Lagging behind would always be beaten. This was an eternal truth. No one asked the two captains what the foreign sniper instructor had said, and there was no need to ask in detail. They knew in their hearts that it was definitely not something good, and even carried a contemptuous attitude. We won't give him a chance to speak again. This was Li Jinyan's answer. It was a very confident answer. Hearing his answer, the corners of his comrades' mouths curled up slightly. G3 looked at the tall figure striding forward without looking back. Storm Assault Captain Demon King. A legendary figure like Q King. Such a responsible and courageous soldier would definitely be able to lead an outstanding tri-amphibious special forces unit. No one doubted that. Raising his thick eyebrows slightly, G3 smiled and said, "This sentence can also be said in front of us. Don't give them a chance to speak. Brothers, don't give those guys a chance to speak again." Everyone knew who he was referring to. In the face of the SFS Border Defense Force's contempt, the Chinese Special Forces participating in the competition would not give them a chance to speak again. Yi Qian, who had already found the best sniper target and was 50 meters away, looked straight ahead and calmly replied, "They talk too much nonsense. It's time to shut them up. Look, even our most good-tempered female soldier is angry. There's no reason to let them talk nonsense. Let's keep a low profile and keep them quiet." The T6 combatant chuckled as he spoke. The back of his hand was accidentally brushed by a leaf, which happened to brush past the spot where he was stabbed by the stinger. It made him gasp. He couldn't help but mutter, "There are so many poisonous things. Be careful. Don't get killed by the things in the mountains before we reach the finish line," Xiao Jinyuan reminded them. At the same time, he stood behind Yi Qian and watched her adjust her sniping position. Every action of a sniper, personally taught by a world-class sniper, seemed to be different. There was no hesitation. What was the distance, what was the best position, and what kind of sniping posture was best to use to complete the sniping? He was very clear in his heart. There was no trace of difficulty. He easily solved all the problems in front of him. Placing the target on top of the swamp was a problem in itself. There were dense weeds growing all around the swamp, and the target was hidden in these dense weeds. If a sniper wanted to see the target, he first had to pass through these weeds that obstructed his vision. From the very beginning, searching for the sniper's target was already difficult. It was late at night, and it was raining, so they still had to search through the weeds to find the target. Even if some snipers could clearly see where the sniper's target was during the day, there was still a possibility that they would not be able to find the target if they had to move around to search at night. During the day, Yi Qian had already memorized the locations of all the sniper's targets. Now, there was no need for him to spend any time looking for them. He could find them immediately and determine where the best sniping position was. Just from these few steps, Yi Qian's sniping speed was much faster than the other countries. Chapter 2965. After adjusting her sniping posture, she had no distracting thoughts in her mind. There was only one goal in her mind, to accurately hit the broken blade target with a single bullet. The Chinese Special Forces team had now entered the last subject of the first competition zone, sniping. All the team members had gathered and were standing behind Yi Qian. In front of them, a bright light flashed toward the Chinese competition zone. The military officer's voice came from the walkie-talkie. The signal was not very good, and there was a static noise. It was the military officer asking which subject the Chinese team had entered. Xia Jinyuan was the only one wearing the walkie-talkie. When he heard the static noise, Xia Jinyuan took off the walkie-talkie and responded to the military officer's question. The Chinese team has entered the last subject of the sniping subject. Prepare to shoot. The military officer's voice came through the static noise again. The Chinese team members all looked at the walkie-talkie in unison. When they heard the military officer's words, they couldn't help but frown slightly. Xia Jinyuan's expression was a little cold. Yi Qian, whose finger was already on the trigger, heard this and quietly put it down again. She was ready to shoot. Xia Jinyuan did not immediately respond. Instead, his gaze fell on Yi Qian, who was ready to shoot. Yi Qian just happened to turn her head and look over. She saw Xia Jinyuan nod gently, indicating that she had no objections. Yi Qian said yes, so Xia Jinyuan smiled and replied to the military officer who was waiting for his reply. Sure, welcome to watch. The Chinese team's reply had already been heard by the military officers of the observation team. They did not stay any longer and immediately walked towards the Chinese competition zone. They wanted to see how the Chinese sniper would snipe. It was really too impressive. They had already entered the last subject of the sniping subject, the broken blade target. Even the American team members still had two subjects that they had not completed. One was the metal ring target, and the other was the broken blade target. There were also some countries that had not completed 3 subjects. Most of them were shell targets. The remaining subjects were bullseye targets and gypsum egg targets. The most difficult target was the metal ring target. The American snipers weren't completely confident and planned to shoot at the very end. At this moment, they did not know that there was only one broken blade target left on the Chinese side. For Yi Qian, this kind of target was not a problem at all. In Principal Chin's 4-year plan, they had all the training that a sniper needed, including all kinds of tricky targets. It could be said that Yi Qian had trained in them all. To Yi Qian, the secondary target was no different from any other target. Turning off the walkie-talkie, Xia Jinyuan stood in front of his comrades and said with a faint smile, "The generals who are going to inspect us are here. There are 5 of them in total. They want to see how our snipers can complete the sniping in a short period of time. They already know the strength of our female soldiers, so it's better to let them see it for themselves than to let them guess behind our backs." For someone who had always been looked down upon to suddenly become stronger, if one did not see it with their own eyes, they would more or less have a skeptical attitude. Only when they saw it with their own eyes would their doubts and disbelief be dispelled. Xia Jinyuan then said to Yi Qian, "You don't have to worry about the generals from the 5 countries. We'll take care of them." Okay. Yi Qian, who could finish shooting at any time, gave a simple reply. He thought for a moment and added, "Even if they're here, it won't affect me." He was very confident and also a little arrogant. It was very rare. No, it was something that had never happened before. Chapter 2966. The Chinese Special Forces soldiers couldn't help but chuckle. No matter what the 5 countries' generals' intentions were, their actions wouldn't affect their female soldiers. That was how arrogant and confident they were. That arrogance was only kept within their ranks and refused to be spread to outsiders. Yi Jian had always been introverted and kept a low profile. In a group of tall male soldiers, she, as a female soldier, was petite and had a petite figure. No matter how one looked at her, she would always appear small and delicate. At the same time, she was also easy to be ignored. It was this easily overlooked female soldier who was happy to be overlooked that suddenly became arrogant. This made the male soldiers feel that it was very rare. Even Lieutenant Colonel Xia, who knew her best, felt that it was rare. But Xia Jinyuan didn't let Yi Qian get up to greet the 5 countries' generals. His original intention was to let the 5 countries' generals see the arrogance of the Chinese side. And Yi Qian's sudden arrogance was exactly what he wanted. His thin lips curled up slightly. He said slowly, "I like arrogance with confidence. Keep it up." This is the confidence of a Chinese soldier who isn't blind. The word "like" was slightly longer and seemed to have a deeper meaning. But Yi Qian, who had no distracting thoughts, didn't understand what it meant and didn't say anything. Lieutenant Colonel Xia was a little worried, but Li Jinyan had a smile in his eyes. Of the 5 people who came, Xia Jinyuan didn't pass. The Chinese team members didn't ask for details either. Since they were all here, they would know who they were when they saw them. General Haywell from the United States, Colonel Leonardo from Italy, General Kallisler from the Fighting Nation, and Colonel Amit Abu from the SFS Border Defense Force. He was also the one who suggested to see the Chinese sniper finish the competition. The last one was Colonel Svendal from the Nation of Islands. The 5 of them arrived at the Chinese side's competition area. From the bright lights, they could see the Chinese female soldier lying in front of them. With just a glance, they could tell that the Chinese female soldier was ready to shoot. It was very likely that she would not stop shooting because of their arrival. General Kallisler shook hands with Xia Jinyuan and said apologetically, "I'm very sorry to interrupt your competition because of our request." General Haywell was still standing there, waiting for the Chinese captain to take the initiative to shake hands with him. In the end, General Carlyle beat him to it, making him a little embarrassed. This guy, he always liked to do things that would lower his status. He thought angrily. He then saw Colonel Leonardo shake hands with the captain of the Chinese side and apologize. The captain of the Chinese side still replied politely. He was like an aristocrat. Every single word he spoke was filled with the incomparable elegance of royalty. Perhaps the captain of the Chinese side really was an aristocrat. This thought flashed through General Haywell's mind. Very quickly, he took the initiative to shake Xia Jinyuan's hand. Although he looked down on the Chinese side, since he was the one who took the initiative to come over, it would be rude of him to look down on them. Compared to Colonel Amitabu's impolite rudeness, General Haywell was very good at putting on a show. Colonel Amit Abu, who looked down on the Chinese soldiers from the bottom of his heart, also wanted to wait for Xia Jinyuan to take the initiative to shake hands with him. He wanted to wait for the Chinese soldier to bow down to him. Unexpectedly, when the captain of the Chinese side shook hands with Colonel Svendal, it was as if he didn't even notice his presence. The topic of conversation very formally changed to the Chinese female soldier. Chapter 2967. Xia Jinyuan naturally would not take the initiative to shake hands with Colonel Amit Abu, whose eyes were filled with ill intentions. Xia Jinyuan could already see through his thoughts. Taking the initiative to shake hands with him meant lowering his head, admitting defeat, then let him think about it on his own. The Chinese side was not going to play with him anymore. Colonel Amit Abu had not expected to be left out in the cold. When the generals of the other 4 countries were talking to the Chinese team members, he was the only one left standing at the back. He could not even squeeze out a single word from his mouth. He could not join the conversation at all. It felt like as long as he took the initiative to speak, he would be admitting defeat, and lowering his head to the Chinese soldiers. The more he thought about it, the more Colonel Amit Abu wanted to speak. The more he did not speak, the more upset he felt. It was like a million needles were stabbing his chest so tightly that it felt like it was going to explode. Then don't give him a chance to speak. The Chinese soldiers and Special Forces soldiers always kept their word. The gazes of the generals from the 5 countries had been fixed on the Chinese female soldiers who were not affected by their conversation. When they saw the confidence of the female soldiers, they also saw the pride of a Chinese soldier. It was a pride that could not be blown away by the wind or scattered by the rain. It was a pride that was as lofty as a mountain. No matter how they looked at her, the sniper rifle in the female soldier's hand was still steady and steady. There was no fluctuation in the aura she was exuding. She was calm, and confident. It was as though she was separated from the rest of the world. She belonged only to her sniping world, and no one could disturb her. General Haywell put away his arrogance and no longer looked down on her just because she was a female soldier. At the same time, Xia Jinyuan said with a smile, "There's a very outstanding sniper in your team." He only regarded Yi Qian as a sniper. He did not think that other than that, Yi Qian had any other outstanding qualities. Xia Jinyuan and the others only wanted to let the generals of the other countries know that Yi Qian was a sniper. Hearing that, Xia Jinyuan said with a smile, She's indeed a very rare sniper. We all respect her very much. If even a female soldier is so good, I'm sure your male soldiers must be even better. General He will put away his arrogance and chatted with Xia Jinyuan in a friendly manner. His dark brown eyes had a hint of darkness as he looked at the young Chinese soldier. Your country must have spent a lot of money grooming you. A lot of money? A lot of what? General He Will was a soldier as well as a politician. A politician's words had many meanings and many traps. If one did not pay attention, they would be tricked. As a result, every soldier had to spend a lot of money. He said calmly, any country's military to grooming soldiers. For example, with the special forces soldiers too. With or what do they spend? He only repeated what he said and did not reveal anything else. A soldier who looked like a noble, a capable soldier, and a very smart soldier. Compared to Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk and Senior Colonel Amit Abu of the SFS Border Defense Force, this Chinese soldier was a little difficult for him to see through. He could not figure him out. Chapter 2968. General Hywell did not give up. He smiled and said, the Special Forces soldiers who can participate in the IKA assault are all outstanding Special Forces soldiers. You can represent so many outstanding Special Forces soldiers to fight for your country. You're all amazing warriors, just like that female soldier who easily completed the most difficult medal ring target. Your country has a group of Special Forces soldiers who shocked us all. Hearing this, Xia Jinyuan couldn't help but want to laugh. General He Will from the United States, do you think you're talking to a young man in his teens? Do you think you could get what you want so easily? Actually, at the end of the day, he just did not take China seriously. He was worried that China had a group of Special Forces soldiers who were as powerful as Yi Qian, so he might as well be considerate for once so that he would not worry so much. At this moment, Xia Jinyuan laughed and said, General, you must be joking. General High Will was stunned at first, but then he laughed out loud. I think I've said too much. Sorry, I should have waited for you to finish the competition before I spoke. His intentional guidance made General High Will, who was just trying to sound them out, feel a lot more at ease. Even the seriousness in his eyes faded. It seemed like the Chinese female soldier's only ability was sniping. Just as Colonel Amitabu said, a person's strength was nothing compared to a country's strength. Although China was a developing country, it was still a large country. It was normal for a large country to have a few outstanding snipers. The generals from the other 4 countries also heaved a sigh of relief. It was rare for a small number of representatives. They did not doubt China's strength, but it did not mean that they were not afraid of China's strength. The rise of a large country could easily make other countries feel threatened, let alone a large developing country like China with a large population and vast territory. Colonel Amitabu, who was furious from being ignored, was suddenly in a good mood. It was rare to find a sniper. Ha ha! What a pitiful country. It was already difficult to find an outstanding sniper, let alone a female soldier. In his country, there were several outstanding snipers in every Special Forces unit. How could China compare to his country? The gunshots above the swamp were still sporadic. There was a time limit for the 5 sniper subjects in the 1st Division, and the total time for the 5 subjects was 50 minutes. It didn't matter which subject you finished first. As long as you finished the 5 subjects in the 1st Division within 50 minutes, it would be fine. There were still 24 minutes until the end of the 5 sniping courses. From the sporadic gunshots, it was clear that each country had entered the most difficult sniping target. Sharuk forced himself to rest for 5 minutes before he aimed at the metal ring target again. He did not know that his superior, Colonel Amitabu, was standing in the middle of the competition area and being ignored like never before. And the only thing that kept him from flinging his sleeves and leaving was Shalak himself. He believed that as a sharpshooter, Shalak would be able to complete the most difficult metal ring target. What the Chinese female soldiers could do, their sharpshooter Shalak would definitely be able to do. 2 gunshots rang out almost at the same time. The 2 snipers, Sharuk and Yi Qian, had finished sniping less than 30 seconds apart. Yi Qian fired while Xia Jinyuan was talking to the other country's generals. Shaluk fired after he had adjusted his position. The result was completely different. Chapter 2969. Bang! The sound of a gunshot suddenly rang out, shocking the generals, referees, and military officials in the middle of the formation area. Their gazes all seemed to have materialized as they all looked in Yi Qian's direction. When Yi Qian finished sniping, the generals from the 5 countries who came to watch were still talking with their heads down. They thought that there would at least be a warning before the sniping, so they didn't focus all their attention on Yi Qian. Instead, they focused on Xia Jinyuan, who was talking. He was the captain of the Chinese team. Sometimes his words could let them hear things that they couldn't normally hear. Since the Chinese sniper was still preparing, they could chat for a while. When she was ready and signaled that they could snipe the target, it wouldn't be too late for them to watch. Even General Kallisler had the same thought. Right after General Haywell finished his question, the young Chinese team leader replied, "This is a joke." This attracted everyone's attention. Bang! A gunshot was heard. It was very sudden, without any warning. The Chinese female soldier whom they had been observing had completed the sniping. It came too suddenly, causing the generals who were prepared to watch to be a little stunned. Just now, the Chinese sniper fired. The Italian general, Colonel Leonardo, didn't hide his shock. He asked in a very surprised tone, "Did I hear wrongly? Or did the snipers from other countries finish sniping nearby?" He really hoped that he had heard wrongly. He really hoped that the gunshot was the snipers from other countries that had finished sniping the target, because he was only focused on talking to the Chinese captain and didn't pay attention to the Chinese sniper at all. Although the referee was also stunned, he knew that it was indeed the Chinese sniper who fired the shot. He nodded and answered Colonel Leonardo seriously. "Yes, Colonel. The Chinese sniper finished the last sniping target in the 1st Division. You didn't hear wrongly." Hearing this, Colonel Leonardo raised his hand and slapped his forehead in pain. "God, I didn't pay attention to her just now. God, I shouldn't have said anything just now. I should have been looking at the powerful sniper on our side the whole time. She is a female sniper who is better than the male snipers. I can't watch her amazing shooting, but I missed it." Colonel Leonardo voiced out the thoughts of the other generals. They had specially come over to observe the amazing shooting of the Chinese female sniper. In the end, when no one was paying attention, including her captain, she opened fire. This is it done just like that? How could he be so fast? They hadn't seen it yet. How did she finish it? What happened to the preparations before the ambush? You should at least give me a letter. It was done without a sound, and they didn't even see it. The moment the gunshots rang out, the gazes of the generals of the 5 countries, who were in a daze, all fell on the female soldier of the Chinese side who had silently completed the sniping. All kinds of feelings welled up in their hearts. He had specially come over to take a look, but in the end, he didn't see anything. Xia Jinyuan pretended that he did not know how to react. After a moment of silence, he said, "Yi has completed the final objective of China's 1st Division." It was a meaningless reminder. Other than that, there was no other explanation. With that, Lieutenant Colonel Xia tilted his head slightly, his thin lips curving into a happy arc. Their coordination was pretty good. They were able to guess his intentions in an instant and cooperate with him immediately. There was no need for him to remind them. Chapter 2970. Even G3 and the others could not achieve this level of rapport. Yi Qian guessed that Xia Jinyuan's intention was because he kept taking the initiative to talk to the generals of the other 4 countries. She knew that he was not a talkative person and would not take the initiative to bring up trivial matters. His sudden change in behavior tonight must have a purpose. What purpose could it be? Thinking of this, it was not hard to guess what his purpose was. Watching how she sniped was the purpose of the generals of the other 5 countries, but Captain Xia did not want them to see more of her. Before he had time to instruct her, he used another method to remind himself. He kept talking to the generals of the other countries to distract them while she took the opportunity to finish her sniping. There was no need for communication. Based on their many years of knowing each other, working together, they knew what the other party wanted to do. At this moment, no one cared about what Xia Jinyuan said. The sudden gunshot made the generals of the other 5 countries look at Yi Qian. It was a little unclear, as if there were waves in their eyes. There were still 20 minutes until the end of the sniping competition in the first division. The Chinese side was the first to complete all 5 sniping tasks. Yi Qian put away her gun, got up, turned around, and saluted her comrades, the generals, referees, and military officials in front of her. Her clear voice calmly said, "The Chinese side has completed all the tasks in the first sniping competition. Broken blade target hit. Sniper Y8. End of report. Everyone, take a 10-minute break and set off for the second division." Xia Jinyuan saluted back and gestured for Yi Jian to rest for a while so that they could prepare for the next march. They did not have much time to rest. The rest of the time was spent running and completing the competition. Calculating the time, they only had 3.5 hours of rest in a day. The Chinese side had completed the sniping competition in the first division in advance, so they had a short break to adjust. Next, they would head to the second division and arrive at the control station to receive the next mission. Yi Qian did not communicate with the generals of the other countries. After putting away her sniper rifle, she stood in the darkness as if she was invisible. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to see where she was standing. She hid her aura and blended into the darkness. This was the camouflage a sniper should have. General Haywell's heart couldn't help but sink again. Tonight, he had seen this female soldier shoot with his own eyes. He had seen this female soldier hit her target, and he had seen this female soldier disappear into the darkness. After watching this for a few times, his heart sank a few times. This Chinese female soldier's ability as a sniper could not be underestimated. Fortunately, there were very few Chinese soldiers like her. Otherwise, the Western countries would not be able to sleep at night. After another hit, the observing generals of the 5 nations didn't say anything else. Even Colonel Amit Abu could only gasp for breath at this moment. He hadn't said a word since he arrived. At first, it was because the Chinese side didn't give him a chance to speak. Now he had nothing to say. Shooting a dagger at a distance of 50 meters, the blade was facing the snipers of various countries, and behind the dagger was a very thin, hard plate. The bullet had to hit the blade, and the bullet would be split into 2 by the sharp blade. Then it would penetrate the thin, hard plate, leaving 2 bullet holes on the thin, hard plate. It was very difficult. Chapter 2971. However, this Chinese female soldier didn't seem to have done any preparation before she completed the broken blade target. She even confidently told everyone that she hit the target. Colonel Amitabh breathed heavily. He wanted to say sarcastically, "Don't be so sure. There's a chance you'll miss the target." But the words were stuck in his throat, and he couldn't spit them out fluently. It was like a fishbone stuck in his throat, and he couldn't get out. It made him feel very uncomfortable. No one would ask Yi Qian why he didn't give them a message. Even though they didn't see Yi Qian shoot with their own eyes, it was enough to shock them. How confident must he be to be able to shoot so decisively without being affected at all? General Kallisler asked the judges, "What's the final result of the Chinese sniper?" The panel of referees quickly gave a reply. Their clear answer was also heard by everyone present. 50 meters pass. The bullet hit the blade. Complete symmetry of the hardboard bullet hole. Sniper hit. Pass. Colonel Amit Abu, who hadn't said anything in the Chinese camp, finally had a chance to speak. He asked the judges, "How many targets did the SFS sniper hit?" The judges felt like this was a difficult question to answer. They suddenly went silent and didn't immediately answer Colonel Amitabu's question. The short silence made Colonel Amitabu's heart sink. He had a bad feeling that this wasn't going to be good news. He was going to hear bad news that he didn't want to hear the most. This also made everyone present think of a possibility. The SFS Border Defense Army sniper probably didn't finish the competition well, which was why the judges were silent. As expected, the judges gave Colonel Amitabu a piece of news that made his vision go dark. Metal ring target SFS border guard sniper failed. 2 shots were fired in less than 30 seconds. One side hit, the other side failed. One side was low-key, and the other side was arrogant. The arrogant side looked down on the low-key side. They thought the low-key side was weak because they were a bunch of lazy soldiers and couldn't be compared to their country's soldiers. Sigh, now that the results are out, I wonder if Lieutenant Colonel Leonardo of Italy is having a toothache. He raised his hand to cover his face, revealing a pained expression. He whispered to General Kallisler beside him, "I have a feeling that he'll go crazy from the pain." The generals of the various countries, including the referees, all knew that the SFS border guards looked down on the Chinese special forces. That kind of disdain was not in their hearts, but was shown everywhere. When they interacted with the other countries' participants, they did not hide their contempt for the Chinese participants at all. They had always thought that they were stronger than the Chinese soldiers and had never regarded the Chinese soldiers as opponents. In the end, reality was really cruel. The guys who thought they were strong failed, and the Chinese side, whom they looked down on, achieved very good results in the sniper competition. The Chinese side's ranking had been rising, and after this round of sniping, they would have a few more points than the SFS border defense team. This way, the Chinese side's ranking would be either 6th or 5th, and the SFS border defense team had always wanted to get into the top 5. The smile on Colonel Leonardo's face deepened. In that case, the SFS Border Defense Army would try even harder to suppress the Chinese side. But for some reason, he really hoped that the Chinese side would be able to suppress the arrogant SFS Border Defense Army. Chapter 2972. General Kallisler, who understood the meaning behind Colonel Leonardo's smile, smiled back at him. But soon, this general, who came from a fighting nation and had a good relationship with the Chinese side, said, "The Chinese soldiers are very humble and gentlemanly. They won't take the initiative to start a fight. So, Colonel, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult to see the hot-blooded scene that you want to see. Their low profile means that they won't have any conflicts with the SFS Border Defense Force. They're a country that advocates peace, and they don't like violence. This can be seen from the Chinese government's policy and foreign diplomacy. They won't take the initiative to start a fight, but they won't let other countries humiliate them either. The SFS border guards have been hostile to the Chinese special forces from the very beginning. They deliberately targeted the Chinese soldiers, and from their words and actions, they targeted the Chinese soldiers in all aspects. The Chinese soldiers have actually always chosen to avoid their sharp edges. Colonel Leonardo, let's continue to watch. As for other things, we should choose to watch from the sidelines instead of participating." This was to remind the colonel from Italy not to get involved in the fight between the Chinese Special Forces and the SFS Border Defense Force, just to see something that he wanted to see. If other sides got involved, things would only become more complicated. This is a fair and just competition based on strength. We're here for the competition, not for force. Colonel Leonardo's smile faded a little as he shrugged nonchalantly. "Okay, I understand what the general means. Don't worry, I won't get involved. However, I'm not sure about General Haywill. He's a general who likes to have fun. General Haywill isn't stupid enough to make a mistake that will damage the reputation of his country in the IKA assault competition. This is just a competition, and it has nothing to do with politics. When there were problems between countries, other countries wouldn't easily express their opinions, and it was even more impossible for them to get involved. As a politician, General Haywill naturally knew this. Lieutenant Colonel Shalak of the SFS Border Guard had wanted to isolate the Chinese soldiers from the very beginning. Unfortunately, they had used the stupidest method, which was not to isolate the Chinese soldiers with their strength. Instead, they had chosen the most despicable method of slandering the Chinese soldiers with their words. Colonel Amitabu, who was full of confidence, could no longer face the Chinese team members. He had once vowed that their sharpshooter, Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk, would achieve the best sniping results and become the nightmare of the Chinese soldiers. He would make the Chinese soldiers avoid Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk and his country soldiers whenever they saw him. He spoke so confidently and used an arrogant expression and a contemptuous look to express his dissatisfaction with the Chinese soldiers. In the end, it all became a joke. Colonel Amitabu left with his tail between his legs. He didn't even say a word to the generals of the other 4 countries who had come with him. He left alone. I won't give him another chance to speak. This was the most powerful counterattack of the Chinese soldiers. The SFS border guard is currently ranked 8th, and the Chinese are already ranked 6th. It's going to be difficult for them to squeeze into the 5th place. With the Chinese's current results, as long as they maintain their current standards, it won't be a problem for them to enter the top 5. General Callisler returned to the observation group. The major who had accompanied him to observe the competition said in a low voice, the SFS border guard should be planning to hold on to the 5th or 4th place and try their best to enter the top 3. Now it's hard to say. Chapter 2973. Yes, everything was hard to say. General Callisler looked at his country's results in the competition. They were already in 4th place, while the U.S. was still in 1st place. At this moment, 7 countries had already completed all the competitions in the 1st division. The U.S. continued to maintain 1st place, and their snipers had also completed the competition perfectly. Estonia's own contestants, Italy's headgear, commandos, and Germany's contestants had all completed the competition very well without making any mistakes. A certain Western country from Great Britain, which should have been in 6th place, had actually fallen to 7th place. They had been surpassed by the Chinese team. There was not much difference in the scores of the 4 countries ranked 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. The rankings could change at any time. General Callisler still had some reservations about whether the Chinese team would be able to get into the top 5. He would have to continue watching. The results of the sniping competition would not be known immediately. They would have to wait until all the sniping subjects in the 2nd division were over the next day before the participating team members would know the results of their respective countries last night. As for their own results, they knew it very well even without the referee telling them. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk knew he had not hit the medal ring. When he put away his gun, his face was so dark that it looked like he had rubbed it against the bottom of a pot dozens of times. They had made sufficient preparations, but they still failed in the end. He did not know how the Chinese team was doing, but it was a pity that he could not ask about it immediately. Otherwise, he would really want to ask now. They had already started crossing the swamp. The SFS border guards tightened the metal rings on the ropes. The 8 team members lined up in a line and cautiously crossed the swamp step by step. This swamp was not very big, only about 3 kilometers in diameter. It was also the smallest swamp in the competition. Although it was the smallest swamp, it still had its fair share of dangers. In the distance, wild wolves howled one after another. It seemed like they were waiting for the arrival of the participating team members from each country so that their pack could have a full meal. Did you guys hear something? Young Sparrow Hawk, who was walking in front, suddenly stopped. He was a scout, so he was in charge of scouting the path in the dark. He would then take turns to scout the area. Before they had even covered half of the 3-kilometer swamp, he heard unusual movements ahead. It was as though something was hiding in the tall bushes ahead. A soldier's intuition was sharp, especially since young Sparrow Hawk was a scout. His intuition was even sharper. When he stopped, the team members behind him stopped as well. The T6 combatant who was walking behind young Sparrow Hawk did not hear anything, nor did he sense that something was wrong. Xiao Jinyuan said to Yi Qian beside him, "Go with Sparrow Hawk and see what's going on." The sharpest among them was Yi Qian. She was so sensitive that she could immediately pinpoint the source of danger. She was the most suitable person to travel with Sparrow Hawk. Yi Qian nodded. He loosened the knots on the rope and held it tightly with both hands as he walked forward. The places she stepped on were all the places her comrades had stepped on before. Yi Jianjian sped up a little. The comrades in front of her saw her coming and immediately reached out to pull her back, reminding her to be careful. Just as Yi Qian was less than a meter away from Sparrow Hawk, the feeling of being stared at made her shudder violently. "Back off, all of you back off. Don't retreat," she said in a low voice as she slowly retreated. "Sparrow Hawk, step back now and slow down. Captain Xia, Captain Li, prepare the live ammunition." Chapter 2974. She said in a low voice as she slowly retreated. Yao Zi, step back now and slow down. Captain Xia, Captain Li, get ready with live ammunition. Damn, what's up ahead? The T6 combatant was about 2 meters behind Yi Qian. When he heard that, he was so agitated that his scalp went numb. He quickly followed suit and slowly retreated. The swamp was not flat ground. If one was not careful, they would sink into the mud. Just as the Chinese team member took a few steps back, a series of gunshots suddenly rang out from above the quiet swamp. Following that, they heard a sound that sounded like a cat's voice. Although the sound was muffled due to the distance, they could still tell that the cat-like sound was very sharp and aggressive. Yi Qian had never heard of such a sound before, nor did she know what kind of animal it was. However, the Italian Special Forces had told her that lynxes, macaques, wolves, and bears were extremely active in the forests of Eastern Estonia, so they had to be on guard against their attacks at all times. The howls of the wolves could still be heard in the distance. From the sound of it, they could tell that it was quite far away. She had heard the sounds of bears before and had even had a head-on confrontation with them. Then there was only one animal left. It's a lynx macaque. We've encountered a lynx macaque. This swamp is the lynx macaque's area of activity, Yi Qian whispered as he pulled Yao Zi along. The two of them retreated back to back. In front of them, several green eyes were flashing. The lynx macaques hiding in the trees had revealed themselves. There were a total of 4 of them. Lynx macaques were rare wild animals in the country, but they were very common in the forests of Estonia. They were also a type of feline that moved stealthily and were slightly smaller than tigers and leopards. In the night, the lynx macaque's green eyes emitted a terrifying light. They stared intently at the intruders who had entered their territory. Their fur stood on end, and they let out low growls of awoo, meow, awoo, meow from their mouths. Wild animals were all afraid of humans and would usually avoid them when they saw them. However, these lynx macaques did not avoid them. On the contrary, they were slowly moving forward. Doesn't this guy live alone? Why are there 4 of them here? When the T6 combatant saw the approaching lynx macaque, he carefully stepped onto a nameless tree that grew horizontally above the swamp. With a cold expression, he said to Yi Qian in front of him, "Take a few steps back and climb up the tree." After entering the forest, they needed to avoid these aggressive wild animals as much as possible. Although the lynx and macaque were timid, the situation in front of them was obviously not good. They were already full of aggression. Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan were already prepared with live ammunition. Once the lynx attacked, they would immediately fire to protect their comrades. "Let's retreat first and take a detour." Li Jinyan, who had already loaded the bullet, tightened the rope with one hand. His cold eyes stared at the lynx monkey that was howling and approaching. "Speed up a little." The T6 combatant had already grabbed Yi Qian's hand and yanked it toward him. Yi Qian leaped over the mud that could make a person sink into it and stood firmly on the tree. She then reached out and pulled Yi Qian up the tree as well. The swamp was full of mud. It was already very dangerous to walk in it during the day, let alone at night. Fortunately, they were still on the same path they had just walked, so it was fine even if they retreated a little faster. After retreating for about a kilometer, the green eyes of the beasts in front of them finally disappeared. They were also afraid. The Special Forces soldiers participating in the competition, including Yi Qian, had all seen blood on their hands before. They had a murderous aura that could make wild animals afraid and also make them feel threatened. Chapter 2975. All the Chinese Special Forces retreated from the swamp and chose to take a detour instead of walking in a straight line. When they retreated from the swamp, the Chinese contestants heard the sharp cries of lynx macaques not far away, as well as several continuous gunshots. In this place, if the Special Forces encountered a wild animal attack, they could choose to shoot. Xia Jinyuan also thought of shooting directly, but Li Jinyan secretly stopped him. Although lynx macaques were not as fierce as leopards and tigers, they were still a type of wild animal that was more difficult to deal with. In addition, it was not a good thing to see blood in the forest. It would attract more ferocious wild animals that lived for meat, such as wild wolves. If they were surrounded by wild wolves, the Chinese contestants would definitely see blood. Now that they had plenty of time, they could totally take a detour. We are about 15 kilometers away from the next control station. First, we will arrive at the control station to receive the next competition lesson. Then, we will take a short break before continuing. After communicating with Li Jinyan, Xia Jinyuan gave the order. All the contestants did not stop and continued to march to the next control station. Li Jinyan looked at the time. It was still early, 7 minutes past 9 o'clock p.m. 15 kilometers would take 2 to 3 hours, so they could arrive before midnight. Midnight was the most tiring time, so it was a good time to rest before marching. I have no objections. If you're really tired, you can rest for 5 to 10 minutes. De Xiao asked. He had been training with the Snowfield Brigade in the mountains for a few months and was now completely adapted to fighting in the forest. De Xiao was the same. In his words, they were now more like the army, not the navy. The 2 Navy members of the Storm Commandos had no problems, so the Army members from the Snowfield Brigade had no problems either. Yi Qian had already memorized the entire map, so Xia Jinyuan did not even need to take out the map. With Yi Qian and Sparrowhawk leading the way, they did not have any intention of stopping to rest at all. They went straight to the second sniper area. After the Chinese Special Forces walked out of the swamp, they chose to take a detour. The observation team soon learned about it. At first, they thought that the Chinese team members would retreat from the swamp and rest for a while after discovering the lynx monkeys. Just like the team members from a certain country in Great Britain, when they learned that the Estonian team members were attacked by a few lynx monkeys, they decided to retreat from the swamp and rest before setting off. Italy and a few other countries also chose to take a break. They were too tired. The first 30 kilometers of cross-country breakout with weights had already exhausted all the participants' stamina. Following that was the small competition between the various countries. All the participating snipers had to be on high alert to prevent themselves from being discovered by the other country's snipers. It could be said that they didn't have a good rest for the entire day. Now that there was a strange situation ahead, and time allowed, they chose to rest for a while before continuing. A few of the top-ranked countries chose to take a short break. The rain had stopped, but everywhere they went was wet. The camouflage combat uniforms had not dried from day to night. The 8 of them had been walking for 4 hours in wet combat uniforms. The night was as thick as ink. The Chinese Special Forces continued to march through the forest like cheetahs, strictly following the time they had set. No matter how dark the night was, no matter how difficult the path in the forest was, it did not stop the Chinese soldiers from marching into the vast primeval forest. Chapter 2976. 5 days and 4 nights of competition. Dozens of courses had been completed, including a few performance courses. It was about 200 kilometers of cross-country travel. If the time was not strictly controlled, it was very likely that they would not be able to reach the control station on time. If they did not reach the control station on time, they would not be able to receive the next competition course. Once they could not receive the next competition course, the course would be canceled and all their points would be deducted. The generals of the observation team thought that the Chinese side would also rest midway. At around 12 a.m., the control station sent news that the Chinese side had become the first country to reach the control station to receive the next competition course. For a moment, the generals of several countries were so excited that they were knocked out of their sleep. What? The Chinese side reached the control station? They reached the control station? Aren't they resting? They didn't rest and kept walking? The commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force wiped his face, not hiding his surprise at all. He thought that the Chinese team members had chosen to rest like the other countries. But they did not. The Chinese soldiers did not rest. They were still on the road. God, were they made of iron? There's no need to be surprised. The Chinese soldiers have a very good system. During the War of Resistance, their soldiers walked out of the 25,000-mile long march in such a cruel environment. This is the power of an example, and it has influenced generations of Chinese soldiers. General Kallisler stood beside the commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force and looked up at the figures of the Chinese soldiers on the screen. The soldiers from China have many things that we can learn from them. General Callistler had studied in China in his early years and was very interested in the history of China's War of Resistance, especially the 25,000-mile long march that created human miracles. He had read a lot of information about the Long March and had seen many touching stories. Therefore, he had always been very respectful of the Chinese soldiers. As a soldier, the commander-in-chief of the Estonian National Defense Force naturally knew about the Chinese Long March during the War of Resistance. This was an incredible feat in human history, an incredible miracle. General Callistler, I think I finally understand why you said that the Chinese side used strength to create miracles. Their ancestors were truly great, very great. They were not afraid of hardships and sacrifices, and the spirit of the Long March became the strongest color in the Army's soul. Therefore, even though it was the first time the Chinese soldiers participated in the competition, they were not afraid and continued to walk until victory. General Callistler looked at the screen and looked at the Chinese soldier who was receiving the next competition at the control station. He said in admiration, "This is a kind of belief, the core of an army's combat strength. When I was studying in China, the Chinese soldiers told me that their martyrs firmly believed in the revolutionary spirit of facing death with equanimity if the revolutionary team killed me. This shocked me very, very much. A person needed to have faith, and so did an army. With unwavering faith, no matter how difficult or bitter the road ahead was, one would continue on without hesitation. Only then would one be invincible and undefeated." Colonel Amit Abu of the SFS looks down on the Chinese soldiers. He's like a frog sitting in a well. He can only see the sky above the well, but he can never see how vast the sky is beyond the well. He looks down on the Chinese soldiers, and he's destined to lose very badly in this competition. After General Callistler finished speaking in a low voice, he no longer paid attention to the screen. There were no longer any figures of the Chinese soldiers on the screen. They received the competition subjects and left the control station. Chapter 2977. On the screen, the Chinese contestants had already left. But in reality, the Chinese contestants had only walked out of the monitoring range of the control station and did not leave the control station. A referee and military official walked out side by side. They were even holding hot dogs and warm milk in their hands. When they saw the 8 Chinese contestants preparing to leave, they hurriedly chased after them. "Hey, friends, please wait a moment, please wait a moment." When the Chinese contestants, who were planning to find a place to rest while discussing their next battle tactics, heard the sound, they turned around in unison. They saw that the referee and military official had swept away their previous seriousness and were now smiling warmly. When they saw them turn around and stop, the smiles on their faces deepened. "It's too cold. Why, all can drink a cup of warm milk and eat a few hot dogs, then change into clean and comfortable clothes and rest for a while before leaving." The referee, who was holding a cup of warm milk in one hand and a hot dog in the other, said temptingly with a smile, "Look at this and think about the various difficulties why all will have to face next. Don't why all think it's too hard and too dangerous?" When one's mind and body were being tortured, if someone encouraged them, they would still continue walking. But if someone kept saying things that discouraged them, then cracks would appear in the determination in their hearts, and they would eventually collapse. Every word the referee said was so tempting. Food, drinks, clean clothes, comfortable clothes. These were what the participating special forces from various countries lacked the most at the moment. Pandora's box had been opened, and all that was left was for any of the Chinese contestants to accept the temptation. Why all need a rest? You've already walked too long. I can see fatigue and tiredness on your faces. Why all must really want to sleep? As the referee spoke, his voice lowered slightly. He saw the Chinese soldiers who were originally standing in front of him raise their hands lightly. Everyone instantly lined up and stood neatly behind their captain. They no longer looked at him and spoke. "This guy is doing it on purpose, right? Is he trying to seduce us?" T6 lowered his head and chuckled. "We didn't have anything to eat or drink, and we had to settle everything on our own. Suddenly, there's milk and hot dogs. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. Something's up. There's arsenic in the milk and crane top red in the hot dog. You'll be finished if you eat it, G3 said seriously. G3 answered seriously. He was standing behind T6 and could clearly hear everything T6 said. Yiqian was standing in front of T6. When he heard T6 speak, he also heard G3 speak. When he heard that, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up a little. He said in a low voice, "When the referee and military officer came over to greet me, their gazes never left me. The two of them really want to give me all the arsenic milk and red hot dogs. Do I look like I'm easy to coax? Easily fooled? So, they always like to make things difficult for me. Hot milk and fragrant hot dogs. Do you want to drink them? Do you want some?" T6. The T6 combatant wiped his mouth and pondered seriously for a moment before replying, "No matter how delicious it is or how much I want to eat it, my life is still more important." He leaned forward slightly and asked Yiqian in confusion, "Our female soldier, why do you only ask me if I want to drink or eat it? You're so naughty." The cold wind carried the rich aroma of the hot milk, while the hot dogs gave off a meaty aroma that made people hungrier. The two fragrances seemed to have hooks that hooked their sense of smell and their hungry stomachs. The military officer walked right up to Yiqian and handed the hot milk and hot dogs to Yiqian. "Drink it, female soldier. It'll make you feel comfortable." Chapter 2978. As for what the price of comfort was, the military official did not say. Yiqian, who had his back straight, looked straight ahead with a determined gaze. There was only one person in his dark eyes, and that person was currently turning his head. There was a smile in his handsome and cold eyes as he stared at her. This was their captain, as well as the goal she was working hard for. She smiled and shook her head. "Thank you for your kind intentions, but I don't need them." The military official wanted to continue speaking, but the T6 combatant stepped forward. Although his delicate baby face was covered in paint, his eyes shone like a wolf's. He said to the military official, "Brother, you can keep your bread and milk for yourself. Our female soldiers, and we don't need them. Thank you." Comfort was bound to come at a greater price. Seeing the items in the hands of the referee and military official, the Chinese team members were already on guard. When they heard those abnormal words, although they sounded normal, it was undoubtedly a psychological tactic to say such things at a time like this. They were making use of the hunger and fatigue of the team members to constantly use words like comfort in an attempt to break down the psychological defenses erected by the team members to achieve their goal. Psychological tactics were also a type of combat tactic. There was no smoke of war, only a silent invasion. If they wanted to win, they would not only have to undergo a physical test, but they would also have to be mentally tempered. More importantly, they would have to experience life and death and combine courage, strategy, and strategy to challenge the limits of their physiology, intelligence, and technology before finally reaching the finish line with excellent results. And along the way, even if there was a pitiful amount of rest time, there would still be unpredictable dangers. Just like now, the military official who handed over the hot milk and hot dogs looked at the only female soldier on the Chinese team. He blocked the T6 combatants' interference and said with a smile what they would say when they saw the special forces of various countries. "You just have to nod now, and the hot milk and hot dogs in my hands will belong to you." There was no nod, only a firm refusal. When the 5 minutes were up, the referee and military official took 3 steps back. This time, the smiles on their faces were much more sincere. "Congratulations on passing a small test and successfully holding on to your 5 points. Congratulations on being the first team to arrive at this control station. I wish you all the best, Chinese soldiers." After the referee finished speaking, the Chinese Special Forces soldier's face darkened a little. Taking a cup of milk or a hot dog would result in a deduction of 5 points. Damn, how could they deduct points so easily? It was not easy for them to win back those 5 points. He had successfully resisted the temptation and had a 50% chance of keeping her. In the IKA assault competition, the points deducted were always much more than the points won. The Italian Special Forces told the Chinese side that 2 years ago, there was a country's special forces that had negative points after the competition. What was even more hilarious was that they had no idea where they had lost points. For example, taking any food from the referees or military officials would result in a deduction of 5 points. For example, asking for information from the referees or military officials would result in a deduction of 5 points. Also, taking a towel from the referees or military officials would result in a deduction of 5 points. Sometimes, these points deductions would come unexpectedly, and one would be fooled if they were not careful. When Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan heard that the Chinese side was the first to arrive at the control station, they did not look happy. In fact, they frowned slightly. He was charging too fast. It was not in line with the low-key battle tactics that they had mainly learned. After the referees and military officials left, Li Jinyan whispered to Xia Jinyuan, "We need to lower the time or score in other areas." Chapter 2979. Yes, it's a fast pace here, so we have to slow down. Xia Jinyuan waved the document he had received for the next competition. "Let me see if there are any longer courses in here." He frowned a little and paused for a moment before saying, "Why are we the first to arrive at the control station? Why would the Americans and Italians fall behind us?" It was a little hard to explain. They have enough time, so they'll be willing to make up for the stamina they lost during the day and adjust for a short while before entering the next round of the competition. Li Jinyan did not think it was difficult to explain. On the contrary, it was very easy to explain. You went overseas for an exchange, so you should have seen how they train. Xia Jinyuan thought for a while before nodding and saying, "Yes, that's very likely. Then we'll have to adjust ourselves a little. We can't train according to the way we train in China. We'll have to cater to them." In China's training, there was no right to rest before reaching the finish line. It was the same abroad, but the Western countries that had participated in the IKA assault program knew how to make better use of their time. About 500 meters away from the control station, they finally found a place to settle down. They took out the waterproof cloths from their backpacks and fastened them with buckles. The 4 corners of the cloths were tied to trees with ropes, and the middle was propped up with a tree trunk that was cut down. A medium-sized shelter was successfully built, and it took them 7 minutes to complete. After covering the ground with the waterproof cloths, the 8 of them could finally sit down and rest after a tiring day. In the middle of the night, the temperature dropped a lot. They sat down in their wet clothes and did not move, so there was no heat generated, but they could already feel the chill. There was no change of clothes, no warmth, no hot water, and no warm food to eat. But no one cared about that. They were all focused on the deduction of points. How sinister! How sinister! Fortunately, I resisted the temptation. Otherwise, I would have lost 5 points. After learning the truth, the T6 combatant pretended to be scared and patted his chest. Although he said it was too scary, his tone was relaxed, and he did not feel burdened at all. It was obvious he could tell things were not that simple. There was no such thing as a free lunch, so they had to take it easy. Young Sparrowhawk said, "They went straight for our female soldiers. They really have no foresight. Our female soldiers are the most difficult line of defense to break through. How can such a blind referee and military official fool us? Let's try it out with this guy. Who knows, we might even succeed." He was patting T6 on the shoulder, so this guy was referring to T6. This caused the T6 combatant to raise his leg and knee Yin Z in the thigh. His leg was raised a little too high, and a trickle of blood could be seen flowing out of his military boot. When the rest of the comrades saw this, they all laughed softly. When the big eel and the big mermaid saw this, they immediately began to take off their military boots. T6 was right. The referees and military officials really had no foresight. Why are they looking for Yi Qian? Is it because Yi Qian is a female soldier? Bad taste, really bad taste. Yi Qian was a female soldier, but not an ordinary one. How could she, who was more resistant to hardships than the male soldiers, fall for it so easily? The few of them reminded each other as they spoke. G3 was in charge of keeping watch, while Li Jinyan was in charge of keeping watch at the back. Xia Jinyuan was sitting in the middle with a miniature flashlight in his mouth. He was carefully looking at the course content and the rules of the competition. Xia Jinyuan had a habit. When he received a mission, he liked to study it alone and discuss it with his comrades after he had a plan in mind. His comrades who had fought together with him for many years naturally knew his habit and would not immediately disturb or interfere with him. Chapter 2980. After about 5 minutes, Xia Jinyuan held a miniature flashlight in his mouth. Perhaps because he had bitten the flashlight, his low voice sounded a little gloomy. "Vice Captain, come here and take a look. T6 is the top position." Their comrades would take a short break, but Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan, the two captains and vice captains, did not have much time to rest. As long as they rested, they would need to sit down and discuss the next battle. There's a parallel rope pistol shooting competition subject. I'm not sure if it's before or after the second sniper competition area. Xia Jinyuan handed the paper document of the competition course to Li Jinyan. There was a hint of coldness between his handsome eyebrows. "Look at the rules of the competition. This thing is a little different from what we've trained before. It's more difficult. The rigid rules require that all team members must complete it. As long as one person fails, the subject's score will be invalid. There are a total of 10 points. Speed and technique account for 6 points, and shooting at the target takes 4 points. Now that we're in front, I'm afraid that our score will be higher. Next, we'll slow down a little. When it comes to the parallel rope pistol shooting competition subject, we'll see if we need to slow down. If not, it'll be easy. If it's necessary, we'll slow down and let other countries pass first. We'll fall behind. What do you think?" After asking, Xia Jinyuan looked at Li Jinyan. Li Jinyan continued to read. The more he read, the more his brows furrowed. After reading, his originally cold voice seemed to break out of the ice, emitting a dense chill. "The route to the second sniper competition area is unclear. We need to find the correct hidden route. There are imaginary enemies along the way, as well as 11 blockade lines. Based on these events, I suspect that the second sniper competition area is still behind. Before completing the parallel rope pistol shooting competition, we'll probably need to break through the blockade lines. It's not until all 11 blockade lines have been successfully broken through that the second sniper competition can begin. Don't forget, the Italian Special Forces reminded us that the IKA assault competition will become more and more difficult as the competition progresses. Some countries will choose to withdraw from the competition due to the unimaginably dangerous and tragic battles. This kind of thing happens in every competition. Generally, some countries will withdraw from the competition halfway through. The sniping competition has become a leisure competition, and these survival competitions are the main battles." Xia Jinyuan was silent for a short while before he nodded. "You're right. The second sniper zone might be behind us. Then what we'll be facing next is an assault on the blockade line. There might even be referees and military officials who pop up on the way and ask if you want some hot milk or hot dogs. Even the greeting is a trap. It's impossible to guard against it. The simpler the trap, the easier it is to be fooled. Hot milk, hot dogs. They're not our favorite. If it were one of the 4 Chinese cuisines, we might be fooled," Li Jinyan said in a serious tone, which made Xia Jinyuan laugh out loud. In the following time, as Li Jinyan said, the first thing was to break through the blockade lines. Every blockade line was extremely difficult to break through. At dawn, when the Chinese team members found a correct hidden route, they had already broken through 5 blockade lines. 5 blockade lines, a distance of 12 kilometers. That was to say, from midnight to dawn, the Chinese team members had only walked 12 kilometers in total. Chapter 2981. After the 12-kilometer journey, even the 2 strong soldiers, Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan, were so tired that their legs felt like they were filled with lead. Every step they took was like dragging their legs. Even if they raised their legs a little, their knees would feel like they were rusted and they couldn't bend their knees smoothly. At this time, they had finished climbing at night and broke through 5 blockade lines. In the competition, They needed to break through 11 blockade lines. That meant that they still needed to break through 6 more blockade lines before they could reach the second sniper zone. It had only been a day and a night since the high-difficulty, high-intensity, long-distance, multi-topic IKA assault. They hadn't even completed half of such a cruel competition. The further they went, the more difficult it was. The harder it was, the more they had to conquer it. Going out of the country and into an international competition, the Chinese soldiers shouldered a mission and responsibility. No matter how difficult it was, they had to persevere. At this time, they had lost contact with the special forces of each country. No one knew where they were or if they had found the same hidden route. There was also the possibility of getting lost or taking detours. These situations were bound to happen. After a day and a night, dawn came quietly. A thick fog rose in the forest. It was as if they had walked into a fantasy forest. The trees and branches that were faintly discernible in the fog stretched out in an intricate manner, revealing a sense of mystery that made people unable to help but feel intimidated. After repositioning and confirming that they were going in the right direction, the Chinese Special Forces didn't stop for long and continued forward. It was another blockade line. Several times, the Estonian soldiers, who had been waiting for a long time, rushed out with guns. They tried to surround the 8 Chinese team members so that each of them could turn in a penalty slip. The Chinese team still used the 2-person running tactic and spread out in an instant. Unlike the soldiers who directly confronted them, they used the method of hiding to avoid being surrounded by the soldiers. After a day and a night of high-intensity running, even people who were made of iron couldn't bear it. The Chinese team was surrounded by imaginary enemies, but so were the special forces of the other countries. Lieutenant Colonel Shahrukh was a little anxious. He arrived at the second control station at around 3 o'clock in the morning. After learning that the Chinese Special Forces had arrived at the control station nearly 3 hours earlier than them, and had become the first of the 12 countries to arrive at the second control station, Lieutenant Colonel Shahrukh, who had always been bewitchingly confident in front of the Chinese soldiers, changed his expression on the spot. He didn't expect the Chinese Special Forces to arrive earlier than the SFS Border Defense Force. Furthermore, they were the first group to arrive. The SFS Border Guard was the 5th team to arrive at the control station. After hearing the news, Lieutenant Colonel Shahrukh immediately ordered all the contestants to speed up. They had to overtake the Chinese contestants and reach the next control station first. The SFS Border Guards hadn't expected the Chinese soldiers to arrive so early. When the order was given, they felt humiliated by the Chinese soldiers. In response to Shahrukh's orders, the team members rushed forward as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They only had one target: the Chinese team members. Defeat the Chinese team member. Humiliating the Chinese team members. Then, too much time had passed. Even when dawn came, Shahrukh and his comrades still hadn't seen any signs of the Chinese contestants. This made them wonder if they had walked too fast and left the Chinese contestants behind. That's right, the SFS Border Defense Forces were that confident. Chapter 2982. We have successfully broken through 3 blockade lines and completed the climb. Lieutenant Colonel Shahrukh, I think it is very likely that we have surpassed the Chinese soldiers. Look here. Holding the map, an SFS soldier in charge of reconnaissance spread the map on top of his backpack. He was very confident and very seriously analyzed the situation. It has been 4 kilometers since we received the competition mission. There are a total of 3 blockade lines in 4 kilometers, and the terrain is quite complicated. There are hills on both sides. If we don't find a correct route, we will get lost in this area. And this is the first time the Chinese soldiers are participating in the competition. It's very normal for them to get lost. Lieutenant Colonel, I think that since we haven't seen any of the Chinese soldiers until now, they're probably lost here. The scout's brown-black finger pointed at a certain spot on the map. This was indeed the part where it was easiest to get lost. This was because the hidden route was intentionally wrong. One needed to combine the location, coordinates, and positioning to find the real route. If one was careless, they would walk down the mountain and end up further and further away. The SFS border guards almost made a similar mistake, but fortunately, they corrected it in time. Now that they hadn't seen the Chinese soldiers after so long, they thought that the Chinese soldiers must be lost. There was no way they had the strength to break through 3 blockade lines in 2 hours. With the strength of the Chinese side, it was still possible to break through 2 blockade lines. The SFS border guards, who were confident in their strength, still didn't know that Shaluk had even lost to Yi Qian in the sniper competition. However, with their personality, even if they knew, they would find excuses like bad weather, too tired, bad guns, and so on to explain their failure. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk didn't agree with the scouts' analysis this time. He shook his head and said with a serious face, "No, no, no. They found the control station around 12. With their strength, they will definitely grit their teeth and persevere if they know about the competition. Just like before, we were all resting, but they rushed on so that they wouldn't be laughed at. From 12 until 6 o'clock in the morning, with their strength, they broke through 7 of the 11 blockade lines. They should be able to complete it. They won't get lost. The soldiers they sent out are all the strongest soldiers on our side. The strongest soldiers were actually so weak." Some of the SFS border guards showed a contemptuous smile. Such a weak soldier could become the strongest on the Chinese side. As expected, there was no way the Chinese soldiers could compare to their Asia's #1. They're not lost. They're definitely still moving forward. We can't stay here any longer. We have to catch up to them. No matter what, we have to surpass them today. We'll use our strength to tell them not to fight so hard. No matter how hard they try, they won't be able to beat us. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk signaled the scouts to put away the map and continued to instill confidence in the soldiers that the Chinese team was very weak. That was how his confidence was passed down from generation to generation. Lieutenant Colonel Sharuk had guessed correctly. The Chinese special forces were not lost and had been moving forward. He had only guessed these 2 points correctly. The rest were all wrong. At 7 o'clock in the morning, under the leadership of Xia Jinyuan, the Chinese team broke through the 9th blockade and entered the parallel rope pistol shooting competition. This was a competition of life and death. The Chinese team members weren't the first to arrive at the arena. In front of them, the Italian team's special forces and the American team's special forces had already arrived. Following behind them were the Estonian team's special forces. Chapter 2983. The contestants from the 4 countries arrived less than 10 minutes apart. They didn't start immediately after they arrived, but sat down to rest for a while. When the dry food reached their mouths, it was mixed with cold water. A mouthful of dry food followed by a mouthful of cold water. They swallowed until their faces contorted and their necks stretched until they had varicose veins. Only then did they manage to swallow the dry food and cold water. This time, the special forces from the 4 countries didn't interact as happily as they did yesterday. The competition between the countries became more and more obvious, and the competition between the strong became more and more obvious. After a day and a night, the difference in strength had become apparent. The contestants who could appear at this time could be said to be special forces with a certain level of strength. The Italian and American teams were still very friendly to the Chinese contestants. When the American soldier who had agreed to meet Yi Qian at the sniper competition area saw Yi Qian, he raised his tired and sore hand to greet Yi Qian. The rest of them smiled and waved their hands. They were too tired. Other than resting, they didn't want to do anything else. Xia Jinyuan finished 2 pieces of hardtack and drank a few mouthfuls of cold water. He felt a little bloated in his stomach. He looked around calmly and said to his comrades, "We still need to buy some time. Right now, we're in 3rd place. Later, we'll be in 4th place. The scores aren't out yet. Let's play it safe." In terms of strength, the Americans and Italians should be in 1st and 2nd place. 3rd place should be Estonia and Great Britain Island. Even a short break required constant communication and analysis of the situation. This was the communication between the captain and the vice-captain. The rest of the team members just needed to listen quietly. The Americans have started to move. Yi Qian's clear voice interrupted the conversation between the two. The two of them looked up at the front at the same time. They first looked up at the 3 10-meter-long ropes hanging in the air. Then their gazes fell on the 8 American contestants in the line. They began to check the pistols in their hands. Later, they would need to use their pistols to complete the target shooting. Handgun shooting over parallel ropes had a very strict rule. The team members had to hold the rope in the air with one hand and rush forward while holding the pistol in the other hand. They had to shoot at the intersecting targets between 20 and 40 meters away. And the danger of this competition was that if the team members didn't hold on to the rope, they would fall down the mountain stream and be smashed to pieces. Because the 3 ropes were suspended in the air between the 2 mountains, this was indeed terrifying. This was also the reason why Xia Jingyuan said that the parallel rope handgun shooting competition this time was a little different from the ones in China. That was because when they trained in China, they would hang a rope between 2 buildings. At the same time, they would wear a protective lock on their bodies. Even if they didn't grab the rope tightly, they wouldn't fall down hard. However, there was no protective lock, and he had to rely on his own strength to complete it. The American soldiers began to move their hands and feet. They kicked their legs and swung their arms to relax their sore muscles. They had rested for half an hour and had recovered a lot of their physical strength. It was almost time for them to finish the competition. Their expressions were very serious. There wasn't a trace of a smile on their faces. As they began, the atmosphere became unusually tense. The referee and military official walked up to them. Their cold voices once again confirmed that they were ready. They said, "Any accidents will be listed as sacrifices. It has nothing to do with this competition. Are you really ready?" The American soldiers only responded with an okay gesture. Chapter 2984. The strength of the American team was widely recognized, especially this team, which was world-renowned for its strength. In the face of a life-and-death battle that could endanger their lives at any time, their attitude could only be described with one word: calm. From beginning to end, they were quite calm, without a trace of fear. From this point alone, it could be seen that the Special Forces team was outstanding. The Chinese Special Forces who came to learn naturally watched their every move very carefully. They were very serious and very meticulous. Even the dry food in their hands that they hadn't finished was quickly stuffed back into their bags, afraid that if they took a bite of the compressed biscuits, they would miss the wonderful performance of the Americans. As the military officer fired the signal gun and gave the order to start shooting, the 8 American Special Forces were as fast as agile monkeys. With a few swish-swish sounds, they really did get on the ropes. Gunshots began to ring out, and targets ranging from 20 to 40 meters away popped out one after another. The American Special Forces soldier on the first rope shot down 2 targets at a distance of 20 meters in an instant with a clean and neat shooting posture. These targets couldn't be seen at a glance. Some of them needed to be searched before they could be seen. When people were sliding on the ropes, the mountain stream below was deep. If they missed, they would only end up in the worst-case scenario. And it was in such a dangerous competition that the tall and big American Special Forces wiped out the dozens of targets hidden in the bushes at an extremely fast speed. 5 minutes later, the 8 American Special Forces soldiers arrived at another mountain peak. They released the ropes and jumped with force, all of them steadily ending this life-and-death battle. When Shalak arrived with the SFS border guards, the other teams had just arrived and were applauding the Americans. The world's first-class special forces, they really live up to their reputation. Big Shark had already stood up from his seat without anyone noticing. His eyes were still glowing as he stared at the 8 American Special Forces soldiers without blinking. He stared at them all the way until all 8 American Special Forces soldiers had completed the parallel rope pistol shooting. From his eyes, one could see a kind of desire. A desire to become stronger, a desire to one day have such a triple amphibious special forces in our Navy. Currently, our country's Navy could only be considered to be in its infancy stage. It was far from the strength of a truly developed country's Navy. The sea was also a country's territory. It was sacred and inviolable. Guarding the sacred and inviolable sea was the lifelong responsibility of a navy. It could be said that the desire in the eyes of the Great Mermaid was the desire of all navies. The Great Merman who stood up felt someone patting him on the shoulder. He turned his head and saw the great eel standing beside him. The great eel's eyes had the same expression as his. He said, "Our goal is them. One day we can surpass them. Learn well, brother. We still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go." The northerner, who came from a coastal city and had a deep obsession with the sea, stared at the American Special Forces. His hands were clenched into fists as he looked sideways at their captain. "Captain, we will surpass them one day, right?" "Of course." As their captain, Li Jinyan nodded indifferently. His eyes were filled with deep certainty and confidence. He deeply believed that the Navy would become stronger. The Great Mermaid smiled. His tanned face was filled with the same confidence as Li Jinyan's. This was not the arrogance of the SFS border guards, but the confidence of having hope for the future. He believed that through hard work, he would be able to conquer the peak. Chapter 2985. Speaking of which, the big merman continued, "Captain, you are our guide. In the future, if you increase the difficulty of our training, I won't complain at all. I won't secretly say things like you're so cold all the time, serve you right for not having a girlfriend behind your back." Li Jinyan, he laughed coldly a few times. The cold laughter without any warmth made the big eel's heart sink. He stole a glance at Demon King Li's face. It would have been better if he didn't see it, but when he saw it, it was so cold that he was about to emit cold air. "You don't have to say that out loud." He gritted his teeth and said to the big merman, "When we go back, how are you going to explain it to your brothers?" It was all said behind his back. How could he say it in front of the Demon King? Li Jinyan laughed coldly a few more times. The meaning was self-evident. This time, the big merman knew what kind of consequences awaited them when they returned to their country. It was a consequence that made him regret it so much that his intestines turned green. Afraid that Demon King Li would laugh coldly again, the big merman quickly changed the topic. He cleared his throat and said seriously, "Captain said that of course we can surpass the American Amphibious Special Forces. Then, we will definitely surpass them. Big Eel, do you have confidence?" "Of course I have confidence. That is our goal." The confident Big Eel answered his comrade, but at the same time, he wanted to stab his comrade in the back. Li Jinyan didn't say anything. He just glanced at his two comrades in arms. In April 1949, our country's Navy was established. After 50 years, our country already had the Navy's surface ship force, the Navy's submarine force, the Navy's Air Force, the Navy's Coast Defense Force, and the Marine Corps. In 1995, our country's Navy entered a brand new era of modernization. Therefore, as a member of the Navy, Li Jinyan shouldered the responsibility of leading a powerful Marine Tri-Amphibious Special Forces. He had no reason not to believe that one day, our Navy would become powerful. There was no reason not to believe that one day, our Marine Tri-Amphibious Special Forces would not surpass the American Special Forces. No matter how high the mountain was, as long as one didn't give up climbing, one day they would conquer it and surpass it. Li Jinyan firmly believed this. This competition had a huge impact on the water demons from the Storm Commandos. The strength of the American Tri-Amphibious Special Forces had deeply shocked them. As a result, in the next 2 days of the competition, the Chinese side would try their best to follow the footsteps of the American Special Forces to see more of the American side's strength. The more they saw, the more the members of the Storm Commandos realized the gap between them and the American Special Forces. Not only were Big Shark and Big Eel shocked, even their captain, Li Jinyan, was also shocked. As the captain, Li Jinyan shouldered a lot of responsibility. Every time he saw the performance of the Americans, he would secretly observe them and memorize their cooperative combat tactics. If he could write it down, it would probably be tens of thousands of words long. On the 4th day of the competition, The 11th and 12th ranked countries withdrew from the competition. They were too tired. The competition on the fourth day had become inhumane torture. Their minds and bodies had been greatly damaged. The special forces of these two countries saw that their strength was too far away from the other countries, so they gave up early and did not continue. Chapter 2986. The withdrawal of the contestants from the two countries did not affect the Chinese special forces at all. Initially, they did not know that the contestants from the 11th and 12th countries had withdrawn. It was the referee who had once again set a psychological trap for the other country's special forces to inform the Chinese team. The Chinese special forces were a little surprised when they heard that there were countries withdrawing from the competition. A few days ago, when they had a short conversation with the Americans and Italians, they had also mentioned that there were always contestants from the participating countries who had withdrawn from the competition. Although they knew about it, they could not help but be surprised when they heard it with their own ears. Withdrawing from an international competition just like that, how would they explain it to their own country when they returned? But on the other hand, with this experience, he could clearly see the gap between himself and others. Therefore, although it was a pity that he had to withdraw from the competition, at least he had experienced it. He knew the gap between himself and others, and saw the difference in strength. It was also a very precious military experience. Meanwhile, the 8 Chinese contestants faced the referee's questioning again. Even though the Great Mermaid's throat was hoarse from the fever, she still straightened her back, stretched her neck, and used her hoarse vocal cords to speak resolutely. "We're not quitting. I'm not withdrawing. I can continue all the way until the end of the competition. Please don't doubt my determination anymore. Thank you." When the referee at the control station questioned the contestants from the various countries, they would use a short surveillance video to look for the contestants who had the weakest willpower and physical fitness and had to rest. The Big Mermaid was picked out by the referee because she had a fever, but it was useless. Even if the Big Mermaid was sick, she still avoided the traps set by the referee with her strong willpower. Because of the competition rules, as long as one of the contestants answered the referee that they had withdrawn from the competition, the team would be eliminated immediately. Not only would they be eliminated in this round, but they would be eliminated for the entire competition. No matter how good their results were in the previous rounds, it would be reset to 0. It was already 7 o'clock in the evening of the fourth day. The smell of barbecued meat came from the tents near the control station. The Chinese special forces who were still fighting had just gone ashore 10 minutes ago. Every member was soaked in salty seawater, and even their bags were still dripping water. Looking at the traps set by the referee for the Big Mermaid, the other 7 members did not say anything. They believed that the Big Mermaid would not be fooled. The night sky over the sea was very hazy, and there was a bright crescent moon at the top of the sky. The cold moonlight added a bit of bone-chilling desolation to the forest near the sea. On the beach, the sound of artillery shells was deafening, and smoke filled the entire coastline. 2 rubber boats crossed the line of fire and approached the coastline, which was like a wall of water splashing out of the sea. This was the effort of the contestants from other countries who had not yet succeeded in seizing the beach. In front of them were the contestants from other countries, while in front of them was the referee who was still trying to stall for time. De Xiao, who was being questioned, as well as Yi Qian, Xia Jinyuan, and the rest of the 7 contestants, who were standing next to him, did not change their expressions at all. There was no trace of anxiety on their faces. He was calm and composed. Even though his body had been tortured to the point of numbness, the majestic temperament of a Chinese soldier never changed. The referee patted the Great Mermaid's shoulder lightly. He did not say anything, but this light pat on the shoulder was enough to express his intention. The Chinese soldier, who had always been in 5th place, was really something. Soon, the Chinese team members left the control station near the beach and rushed into the primeval forest where even the moonlight could not reach. Their bodies were already numb from exhaustion, but their strong willpower kept the Chinese special forces running towards the finish line. Chapter 2987. At around 7:30 in the evening, the SFS Border Defense Force, who had been lagging behind the Chinese team, arrived at the coastal control station under the lead of Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk. As soon as he saw the referee, he couldn't wait to ask about the Chinese team situation. Have they not succeeded in seizing the beach yet? To be honest, this time it's much harder than before. Our rubber dinghies were actually pierced by the soldiers hiding under the water. Later, we had to steal another country's rubber dinghy before we succeeded. It's too difficult. It's even harder than before. That was what Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk said. He emphasized that it was difficult to steal, difficult to land. He also reminded the referee that they had to steal another country's rubber dinghy before they succeeded. In other words, if the Chinese team's rubber dinghy had been damaged, they definitely wouldn't have been able to steal it. That was what he thought. Naturally, the SFS Border Defense Force soldiers also thought the same. From today onwards, the SFS Border Defense Force will be competing against the Chinese team, the Fairy Tale Kingdom contestants, and the American team. Therefore, Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk, who was determined to compete with the Chinese team, believed that the opportunity to directly humiliate the Chinese team had arrived. When they received the mission at noon, Shaluk and the SFS Border Defense Force soldiers were very excited. They were so excited that they high-fived each other in celebration. They hadn't had a chance to have direct contact with the Chinese team for the past few days. Now that the opportunity had come, they naturally wouldn't let it go. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk still didn't know that he had lost to Yi Qian every time in the sniper competition. Senior Colonel Mitabu was afraid that their sharpshooter Shaluk wouldn't be able to accept his loss and wouldn't be able to perform well if he knew, so he kept his secret. The contestants from the other countries, such as Yi Qian, all knew the results. However, because the countries hadn't met for the past few days, Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk still didn't know that he had lost. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk, who didn't know that he had lost, continued to maintain his false confidence and competed with the Chinese team. Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk, who didn't know the current ranking of each country, was even more certain that the SFS Border Defense Force's results would definitely be far better than the Chinese team's. In response to Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk's question, the referee smiled and replied, as early as half an hour ago, the Chinese team succeeded in seizing the beach. Now, they have entered the forest and are beginning to complete the next mission. You guys are too tired. It's time for you to take a good rest. You can withdraw from the competition. You can really withdraw from the competition. When Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk heard that the Chinese soldiers had successfully seized the beach half an hour ago, he did not listen to what the referee said next. He only knew that the Chinese soldiers had surpassed the SFS. The border guard. It was also because they were so concerned about the Chinese soldiers that the referee's deliberate attempts to make things difficult for them had no effect at all. The referee also noticed that something was amiss, so he simply waved his hand and let them go. Xia Jinyuan had already led his team into their final journey. After 5 days and 4 nights, the competition would end at 5 p.m. the next day. Perseverance is victory had become the Chinese side's mantra. So far, the Chinese side had handed in 14 penalty slips, 1 for each of them. The ones with the least were Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan. They had only handed in 1 penalty slip each, and it was for the sake of covering for their team members. The sky gradually brightened, and the morning fog rose in the forest. The Chinese soldiers, who had taken turns to sleep for less than 3 hours, set off again. It's the last day. It's 6 o'clock in the morning now. There are still 11 hours until the end. There are still 3 control stations, 14 blockade lines, and 3 major competitions. Straighten your backs. Even if you bite off your tongue, you have to finish the last 11 hours. After 4 days and 4 nights of walking, Xia Jinyuan's gaze was still as sharp as a wild wolf's in the forest. His eyes, which were bloodshot like spider webs, burst forth with ferocity. He was like an undefeatable god of war, conquering everywhere. Chapter 2988. There was only 1 day and 1 night left. In this vast primeval forest shrouded in the morning fog, there was a group of soldiers who were not afraid of death. They bore the honor of fighting for their country. Even though they knew there was danger ahead, They would not back down. Even if every cell in their body was screaming for them to rest, they still could not stop their footsteps. They had to continue even if they had to bite off their tongues, not for anything else but to fight for their dignity. They were not fighting for themselves, but for their country. They wanted to show those Western countries that looked down on China the tenacity and perseverance of their soldiers. In order to protect the dignity of their country, in order to protect the honor of their country, as a soldier, they would not regret even if they died 100 times. This is a correct route, but this area is full of swamps. We need to cross the swamps, and it is also the last swamps of the entire competition. I will recalculate again. You guys wait. In the morning fog, Yi Qian, whose legs were trembling, leaned against a tree trunk. Last night, when they had rushed ashore, both of their knees had knocked into sharp rocks on the beach. It had been so painful that they had almost fainted. Although the pain had lessened, their entire knees seemed to have rusted. They could not even do a normal squat. Their knees were so painful and tired that they could no longer bend normally. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, there was another hailstorm. Although the sky was bright now, the cold air was still bone-chilling. There were a few crystal-clear hailstones of different sizes beside Yi Jian's military boots. The cold air continued to rise, and the pain in his injured knee became even worse. But she did not say anything. She gritted her teeth and used her backpack to support the rough bark of the pine tree. She used her back to support the center of gravity of her body. She held the topographic map that she had received from the mission in her hand. Based on the location and the map in her mind, her brain was like a computer, and the two maps in the depths of her mind were combined into one. She was concentrating on her thoughts. Xia Jinyuan, who was standing beside her, glanced down at Yi Qian's tensed legs and frowned slightly. Then, while Yi Qian was thinking, she heard Xia Jinyuan whisper to her, "Did you hurt your knee?" It was a confirmation, not a question. Even though Yi Qian did not take the initiative to say it, he had already asked, and in such an affirmative tone, so Yi Qian replied with a soft hum and did not say anything more. He continued to ponder whether the correct path he had just come up with was correct. She had always been a patient person. She didn't care about small pains. Now that she had admitted it herself, it was obvious that it was really painful. As the team leader, Xia Jinyuan suppressed his heartache and said to Li Jinyan, "Give her a hand. Her knees hurt and she can't bend her leg." He did not try to hide the truth for Yi Qian. Instead, he opened his mouth to let all his comrades look over. Yi Qian, who was still deep in thought, seemed to have sensed something. She looked up from the blurry map and saw her comrades staring at her legs. Instantly, she felt her legs tremble even more violently. "Last night, I was injured by the beach rocks. It's not a big problem." She smiled faintly. Her smile was as soft as a dandelion floating in the wind, pure white and graceful. Her black eyes were like cold stars, revealing a cold sharpness. The two completely different expressions blended together, but it didn't appear to be the slightest bit out of place. One only felt that this female soldier was so firm that it moved one's countenance. The male soldiers from G3 had already turned their heads slightly. Everyone's lips were pressed tightly together, and their fists were clenched even tighter. Chapter 2989. Someone once said that war belonged to men, and this strong female soldier in front of them used her strength to shoulder the responsibility of fighting for the glory of the country. War no longer belonged to men, it belonged to soldiers. And soldiers didn't differentiate between men and women. The vigilant Li Jinyan stepped on the bushes with his military boots, making a kacha-kacha sound under his feet. His expression was as cold as the cold stone at the top of a snowy mountain, cold and silent. Without waiting for Yi Qian to refuse, Xia Jinyuan carried Yi Qian's waist, and Li Jinyan bent down to carry her legs. On the other side, G3 had already quickly unpacked his luggage and took out a moisture-proof cloth. Big Shark and Big Eel immediately took it and spread it out. Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan carried Yi Qian and placed her on the moisture-proof cloth. "Look carefully, we have 10 minutes to rest." Xia Jinyuan's expression didn't look too good, but his face was painted so it wasn't obvious. His voice was extremely tense, as if he was enduring something. Li Jinyan, whose jaw was tense, said in a deep voice, "You massage her left leg, and I'll massage her right leg. Let her muscles relax." Xia Jinyuan nodded and said to the team members beside him, "Massage each other to relax." There are still 2 tough battles in the day. One was a battle with the SFS Border Defense Forces, and the other was the final attack or defense. Yi Qian was actually a little embarrassed. She was being carried and massaged. She was getting special treatment. She wanted to say a few words, but when she saw the expressions of the 2 captains, Yi Qian showed a rare trace of fear in her heart. She should know better and not say anything now. She was wearing a jungle camouflage uniform, and there was a constriction at the bottom of her pants to make it easy to tuck into her military boots. She loosened the constriction and rolled it up her thighs. Even though she was wearing a pair of quick-drying, moisturizing skin-tight pants, the bloodstains on her knees were very obvious. The bloodstains covered a large area, covering her entire knee. "Her knee is injured." G3 glanced at her, and his gravelly voice became lower and hoarser. "The pants are stuck to the wound. Give me the scissors." Xia Jinyuan raised his hand, and Xia Jinyuan immediately took out a pair of sharp, foldable scissors from his bag and handed them over. Xia Jinyuan took the scissors and stared coldly at Yi Qian's knees. Without raising his head, he said in a hoarse voice, "I need to deal with it. Bear with it for a while." Li Jinyan pressed down on Yi Qian's legs. He looked up at his sister and said, "Sometimes a moment of forbearance will only lead to greater pain in the future. You shouldn't have endured it from the start. We've been stalling for time, so we still have time to treat your wound." The Calm Demon King was angry. In the face of his brother's suppressed anger, Yi Qian could only smile bitterly. "At that time, I only felt pain. I didn't know I was bleeding. If I had known, I would have treated the wound." Shalak and the others pressed too hard. At that time, they were attacking the beach. "I only wanted to break through the blockade. Who would have thought that I would bleed? If I had known, I wouldn't have held back." She really didn't know. If she had known, she definitely wouldn't have held back. Yi Qian looked at Xia Jinyuan, who was holding a pair of scissors and beginning to cut off the knee of her quick-drying pants. She explained, "It's the last sprint. I know what's important." She didn't realize. If she did, she would have treated the wound. Xia Jinyuan lowered his head and finally spoke. Although his voice was tense, it wasn't as cold as before. "Bear with it for a while. It'll hurt a little." Chapter 2990. They had to cut off the clot that had formed around the wound, which was equivalent to tearing open a scabbed wound. Naturally, it was painful. Yi Qian endured the pain. The wound wasn't too bad, but there were friction wounds around it. There was a blunt wound in the middle of his knee that was the size of a coin. It was a little inflamed, and the periphery was red and swollen. Cleaning, disinfecting, bandaging. Xia Jinyuan handled all of this by himself. Li Jinyan looked at the wound and felt a lot more at ease. He kept massaging Yi Qian's calf muscles with both hands. Every time he massaged Yi Qian's calf muscles, he had to endure the pain of the massage. It was actually more painful than treating the wound again. You have to relax your muscles. Right now, you're prone to muscle strain. When Li Jinyan saw this, he didn't relax his grip. Instead, he tightened his grip. After a while, Yi Qian felt the calf muscles warm up like they were being roasted. It was really painful, but it was also enjoyable. Both of his knees were injured in the same position. Xia Jinyuan quickly treated both wounds and bandaged them. Then, together with Li Jinyan, he relaxed Yi Qian's muscles. When it came to the area above the knee, Li Jinyan handed it to Xia Jinyuan. Yi Qian didn't feel too awkward now. It was the same massage, so there was no need to differentiate between men and women. When it came to the base of the thigh, Xia Jinyuan didn't press any further. They couldn't apply any ointment, so they could only rely on their hands to massage. Yi Qian focused her attention on the blurry topographic map again. She carefully combined it with the map in her memory. After confirming that her deduction was correct, her slender fingers swiped across the simple topographic map given by the control station. She said with certainty, "That's right. This is the correct route." Yi Qian said that passing through the last swamp was the correct route. None of the team members doubted her deduction. After the map in his hands had been snatched last night, he relied on the large map that Yi Qian had memorized in his mind. Combined with the blurry topographic map given by the control station when he accepted the mission, Yi Qian's deductions had never been wrong. The imaginary enemy that appeared the night before had come for the map, and the rules clearly stated that the map could only be carried by the team leader. After Xia Jinyuan understood their intentions, he put up a symbolic resistance and handed over the map to save his energy for the next battle. Yi Qian had already memorized the entire map, so it didn't matter if he had the original map or not. As expected, every time Yi Qian received a mission from the control station and received a blurry map, he would be able to accurately find the correct hidden route. Now that she said that the swamp was the only correct route, who would question her? After her legs were relaxed, Yi Jian did not let Xia Jinyuan massage her anymore. Instead, she massaged Xia Jinyuan's legs to relax. They had been helping each other along the way and did not feel that there was any need to avoid arousing suspicion. Xia Jinyuan said, "There are only 3 courses left, and the last one is attacking the base. The first 4 teams to arrive at the base will be the defending team. We don't know our ranking right now, so we might be the defending team, or we might be the attacking team. Regardless of whether we are the defending team or the attacking team, we will encounter the SFS Border Defense Forces. They have a lot of opinions about us now, so be careful when you meet them. Fighting is based on drawing lots, so you can use cold weapons. We have to be careful here too. Swords have no eyes, so we can only accept it if we get hurt." The day had arrived, and so did the final round. It was time for the final round between soldiers from different countries. Chapter 2991. Passing through the minefield was part of the competition that had to be completed before passing through the swamp. From 6 in the morning to 8 in the morning, there were only 2 official competitions left for the Chinese team members. After going through the trials of life and death, their iron-like bodies were tempered again. When they entered the final swamp, even strong special forces soldiers like Xia Jinyuan and Li Jinyan started to falter. Looking at the seemingly endless swamp in front of her, Yi Qian's heart sank. She couldn't help but look for the figure that had always made her feel at ease. Xia Jinyuan was wrapping the safety rope around his shoulders. The safety rope was a very important tool to pass through the swamp. Sometimes it could even play a life-saving role. After wrapping the safety rope, he raised his eyes and looked to his side. Between Big Shark and G3, his eyes met with Yi Qian's. The weather was not very good. It was extremely gloomy, so gloomy that it made people panic. Yi Qian stared at the young lieutenant colonel, who was as tall as a mountain. His eyes, which were as vast as the universe, were as calm as a mirror. There was not a trace of panic in them. With just one look, Yi Qian felt her panicked heart slowly calm down. He was actually very cold. Even his lips were purple from the cold. When he was massaging her legs earlier, she could clearly feel his fingers trembling from the cold. He and Big Brother were both commanding officers, but as the leader, he had to work harder. When the team members were resting, they could still close their eyes and rest, but he had to make use of the time to adjust his tactics to avoid losing too badly. He was so tired, but he never complained about it. Not even a word of complaint. This young lieutenant colonel, who was as tall as a mountain, always shouldered the heavy responsibility of the entire team. He didn't even dare to say, "I'm tired," out loud. If he said that, he was afraid that the morale of the team would collapse. After 4 days and 4 nights, the man she loved deeply had lost a lot of weight. Because of his weight loss, even his usually gentle eyes were as sharp as swords. Yi Qian wanted to smile at him, but when he saw his tired face and bloodshot eyes, he couldn't bring himself to smile. She couldn't bring herself to smile, but Xia Jinyuan did. His gaze was gentle, and his smile was soft. His deep eyes automatically blocked out the mountains and rivers, and in the center of his pupils, there was only Yi Qian's figure. "I'm here," His thin lips that were purple from the cold moved slightly as he communicated with Yi Qian through his comrades. He only said 3 words before retracting his gaze and communicating with G3 and young Sparrowhawk. The swamp is too big. I just noticed that there are some animal skeletons on the surface of the swamp, which means that there's a lot of mud and quicksand. G3 walked behind Sparrowhawk. Follow closely behind Sparrowhawk. You also need to protect Sparrowhawk's safety. If anything happens, rescue him immediately. Even his deep voice was hoarse. Yi Qian slowly retracted his gaze and moved his arms and legs. Jackdaws flew over the swamp, leaving behind a string of unpleasant cawing sounds. In the primeval forests of eastern Estonia, black jackdaws could be seen at any time. Sometimes, the unpleasant cawing sounds could even be heard from the treetops in the middle of the night. After hearing it so many times, one would get used to it. Yi Qian sniffed lightly. After a while, he squeezed out a smile. It was a little stiff, but at least he was calm. Li Jinyan, who had been watching the entire time, couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He fiercely took in a breath of cold air, which went back and forth in his chest, then turned into a murky breath and exhaled. Chapter 2992. His little sister. She loved Xia Jinyuan dearly. She usually didn't show her love for Xia Jinyuan, but when no one was paying attention, she would show her love for Xia Jinyuan. Xia Jinyuan was the same. When no one was paying attention, he wouldn't look anywhere else. As long as he had the time, he would only look at his little sister. The relationship between the two of them was indeed very good. It was so good that sometimes, as a brother, he was jealous. But when he thought about it, he felt relieved. Both of them placed each other at the top of their hearts, loving, doting, and spoiling each other. Their emotional world was so pure that only the other's figure existed, not allowing the slightest bit of impurity to mix in. This was probably the happiness of being together forever. After the preparations for entering the swamp were completed, at 8:30 in the morning in Estonia, the Chinese Special Forces entered the desolate swamp in the drizzle. There were deep muddy pools in the swamp. Under the withered grass that was almost half the height of a person, it might not be solid soil, but a deep quagmire. The fallen trees looked sturdy, but when you stepped on them, you could crush the weathered trees into pieces. The competition would end before 6 o'clock p.m., which was when the sky had just darkened. Everyone couldn't walk too slowly. If they walked too slowly, they would waste time and might not reach the finish line before 6 o'clock p.m. Halfway into the swamp, Sparrowhawk, who was scouting ahead, poked the withered grass growing in the swamp with a stick in his hand. After confirming that there was no mistake, he stepped on it. Before G3, who was behind him, noticed anything strange, Sparrowhawk's face suddenly changed. His foot, which had stepped on the withered grass in advance, sank directly into the mud. His body was so tired that even his nerves had lost their agility. His brain was aware of the impending danger, but he could no longer control his body. Not only did he fail to pull his feet out of the mud in time, his entire body fell into the mud. G3, who was following closely behind, saw Sparrowhawk suddenly fall forward. He subconsciously grabbed the backpack on Sparrowhawk's back and forcefully pulled him back. The sudden and major accident didn't make them panic. Xia Jinyuan immediately threw the safety rope he had been carrying on his shoulder forward. Tie the safety rope to your shoulders. Pull tight at the back. Behind them were Yi Qian, Big Shark, T6, Big Eel, and Li Jinyan. Xia Jinyuan threw out the safety rope, and Yi Qian quickly grabbed it. As soon as he pulled, a strong pulling force suddenly pulled Yi Qian forward. The great merman grabbed Yi Qian's bag tightly and roared. He pulled his hands so hard that the veins on the back of his hands bulged. He pulled Yi Qian's body back to its original position. Pull back. Pull back. The G3 in front roared anxiously. He roared until the green veins on his temples protruded. Even though his face was blurred by the oil paint, it could be seen that he was holding back his breath. He wrapped the safety rope tightly around the Sparrowhawk's shoulders and leaned backwards. Bit by bit, he pulled the sparrow hawk out of the mud. The swamp seemed to have concentrated all of its gravity. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. His legs seemed to never be able to find a foothold, and he slowly sank until the mud covered his head. Sparrow Hawk, who was stuck in the mud, couldn't exert any strength at all. He couldn't exert any strength, and he couldn't exert any strength. In this situation, if he still exerted any strength, it would undoubtedly be more of a hindrance than help. His comrades behind him pulled on the safety rope tightly. G3 seized the time to lock the safety rope on his body onto the straps of Sparrowhawk's backpack. This way, there would be double protection. Chapter 2993. Sparrowhawk did not sink straight into the mud with both legs. Because he stepped out with one leg, half of his body sank into the mud. The mud was not the kind of sticky mud that would sink quickly as long as one did not move. Instead, it was quicksand, water, and mud that sank quickly and strongly. From the time he discovered the situation to the timely rescue, half of Sparrowhawk's shoulder was covered in mud. He had to twist his neck and tilt his head upward to breathe normally. No wonder Xia Jinyuan and G3 shouted. Sparrowhawk's situation was critical. His life would be in danger if he was a minute slower. Be careful behind you. Don't sink in from both ends. Be careful in the middle. Don't retreat too much. Pull. Almost there, almost there. Xia Jinyuan and G3's voices intertwined. The two pulled until the muscles and ligaments in their arms were about to break. They gritted their teeth and worked together with their comrades behind them to pull Sparrowhawk up. Yi Qian started the rhythm. She was in the middle, so her comrades could hear her. With every pull, she shouted in a hoarse voice, 1, 2, 1, pull. 1, 2, 1, pull. After more than 10 minutes, they finally pulled Sparrowhawk out of the mud with half of his body sunk into the mud. At this time, every Chinese Special Forces soldier was so tired that they did not even have the strength to stand up. They sat on the wet, withered grass and panted heavily. While panting, the 8 of them looked at each other again. After a few seconds, they all laughed heartily. Tenacious willpower, spirit of never giving up, and a high degree of tacit understanding had an unprecedented harmony in this cold weather. The swamp was about 15 kilometers long. From 8:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., it took nearly 3 hours. The Chinese contestants, who had brushed shoulders with death several times, finally walked out of the swamp successfully. They reached the last control station to accept the mission within the allotted time. 11:30 in the morning in Estonia was 4:30 in the afternoon in China. Cicadas' tireless cries of cicadas could be heard everywhere in the northern and southern cities. The large leaves of the parasol trees were also withered by the scorching sun. They drooped softly, waiting for the night to come so that they could take a breather. In a prison in southern province, several bailiffs walked over with batons and pistols at their waists. They handed over the prisoner to the prison guards and brought Yi Zhifan to the court. This was a special trial, a trial that could not be made public. Yi Zhifan, who had been in prison for several months, had a numb expression on his face. When the prison guard brought him out, he didn't ask anything. When the bailiff brought him to the court, he still didn't ask anything. Even when he saw his ex-wife, Sun Dongqing, he didn't raise his eyes. What else was there to ask or see? After being locked up for so long, there was only one possibility. When the judge's name, yes, his hands and feet, his legs and his hands and feet, his feet and his legs. He is sentenced to death and deprived of his political rights for life. When the judge read out the final result, Yi Zhifan's hands trembled slightly. Death penalty. He was sentenced to death. He murdered Sun Xueqing's daughter, Yi Qian, and protected the Red Class 1 wanted criminal, Sun Yaozu. He used his position to open the door for Sun Yaozu. Not only did this make him proud in business, but it also made him proud in smuggling. What else? Oh, there was also the car accident that caused his opponent to be half paralyzed. At the same time, he used his connections to murder the retired Principal Chun. Everything was found out, one by one. Even the people who worked for him at the time were arrested and testified in court. There was no room for him to argue. Chapter 2994. Yi Jifan accepted the verdict calmly. Did he plead guilty? Of course, he had to plead guilty. He had committed one crime after another. How could he not admit to it? He had to plead guilty. From the day he was arrested, from the day Sun Dongqing and Sun Ying reported him to the court, he knew he would not get a good result. After being arrested for a few months, from the initial fear to the current calmness, he even thought that he had stolen the time he spent waiting for the trial. How pitiful. He thought he had stolen the time to live a few more months. The judge asked him if he had anything else to say. Yi Jifan shook his head, indicating that he had nothing to say. He did not even have any last words. He was born with a hard life. He was brought back to the Yi family by old Madame Yi and raised as her son. He did not have many good days. When Yi Jixiang was born, he and his brother Yi Xinfan became the targets of exploitation by old Madame Yi in order to earn a dowry for Yi Jixiang. At that time, life was hard, but he was used to it. Everyone suffered the same. But he was smarter than Yi Xinfan. He knew how to be lazy and he liked to study. Every year, he came back with good grades. At that time, old Madame Yi did not know that he was actually her son. Seeing that he was smart and eager to learn, she scrimped and saved to send him to school. At that time, although life was hard, he did not think it was hard to live, until he found out that his brother Yi Xinfan was not his uncle's son, but a little beggar that old Madame Yi casually brought back from the street. That day, when he found out the secret, his mind became active. Dad, you still don't know that my brother is not my uncle's son. I think you don't want my brother and Dad to know. Mom, let's make a deal. You and Dad will pay for me to finish the remaining 2 years of school. Old Madame Yi, who was sitting beside the kerosene lamp, chuckled softly after a long while. At that time, he did not know the meaning behind that soft chuckle. Later, when he found out that he was not even old Madame Ye's biological son, he realized that the soft chuckle contained old Madame Ye's disdain for him. This was the first deal he made with old Madame Yi. After graduating from high school, he did not go to college. Then, Big Brother married Sun Xueqing, but not long after, he was forced to marry Sun Dongqing. The two brothers married the two sisters. At that time, the village was still gossiping for a long time, pointing and gossiping. Who knew how many sarcastic remarks were said behind their backs? Even he himself didn't know how old Lady Yi was so capable that she actually made the Sun family agree to marry the two daughters to the poor Yi family. At that time, he didn't know that he wasn't old Lady Ye's biological son either. His eldest daughter, Sun Xueqing, was his classmate. She was beautiful and tall. Later on, she was recommended to join the army and became a soldier that everyone envied. However, when she came back to visit, she married his eldest brother, Yi Xinfan, in less than a week. A month later, he married Sun Dongqing. Sun Xueqing gave birth to his niece, Yi Qian. When Yi Qian was 6 months old, he had a daughter, Yi Ying. 2 years later, old Madame Yi forced Yi Xinfan to work in the mines. Yi Jixiang was of marriageable age. She needed more dowry for Yi Jixiang's grand wedding. Later on, more and more things happened. It made him more and more aware of how cruel old Madame Yi could be. At the same time, it also made him realize that he had to obey old Madame Yi in order to have a foothold in this family. Chapter 2995. Yi Xinfan died in a mining accident, and the compensation money was all in the hands of Granny Yi. She didn't give Sun Xueqing a single cent. When old man Yi found out that Granny Yi wanted to give all the compensation money to Yi Jixiang as a dowry, they had a big fight, and old man Yi finally found out that Yi Xinfan wasn't his uncle's biological son. Old man Yi didn't know that he missed out on another secret, and he heard this secret. So even he wasn't old man Yi and Granny Ye's biological son. He was just an abandoned child who had some blood relations with the Yi family. 3 months later, Sun Xueqing, who lost her husband and was cursed by Granny Yi, was recalled back to the army. Granny Yi took the compensation money and married Yi Jixiang. A year later, Sun Xueqing died, and he became a village leader. Later, he received a letter from an unknown source. Granny Yi agreed to give Yi Qian to him, and the only condition was to raise Yi Qian to a useless state. It was exactly the same condition as in the letter. At that time, he faintly felt that there was something unusual about Sun Xueqing leaving home to return to the army, and then her sacrifice. Later, Sun Yaozu, who was blind in one eye, returned to the village and found out that one of his eyes was blinded by Sun Xueqing, who was on a mission. He was even more certain that Sun Xueqing was forced to leave by Granny Yi because of someone. 20 years passed in the blink of an eye. Looking back, he realized that he was wrong from the moment he made a deal with Granny Yi. He made one mistake after another and finally lost his life in prison. Although he was wrong, he didn't regret it. He had to admit what he had done. How could he regret it? The only thing he regretted was that he didn't raise Yi Qian to a useless state. In the end, he let this orphan girl turn her life around. Little by little, the truth of the past was uncovered. Without much action, he was secretly sent to prison. For him to be sent to prison, Yi Qian must have done something. After fighting with others for so many years, he couldn't even win against an orphan girl. Ridiculous, ridiculous, too ridiculous. The biggest mistake in his life was to let the tiger return to the mountain. As for other things, he didn't regret it, and he didn't want to admit his mistakes. Life was only a few decades, and everyone had their own way of living. He chose the way he thought was right and walked the path he wanted to walk the most. Therefore, he did not feel that he had done anything wrong. However, he was defeated. The winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. This was an eternal truth that had never changed since the ancient times. The sharp, ear-piercing, crazy laughter pulled Yi Zhifan back from his thoughts. He raised his head and looked at Sun Dongqing, who was laughing like a lunatic. The corners of his mouth twitched coldly, and he no longer looked at the woman who had lost a lot of weight. Sun Dongqing had been staring at Yi Zhifan the whole time. She stared at this ex-husband of hers whom she had once given her heart and soul to, only to be treated so coldly in return. Retribution, retribution, this is retribution. Yi Zhifan, you abandoned your wife and daughter. You deserve to go to the 18th level of hell. Death sentence, retribution. This is your retribution, She laughed sharply, saying harsh words that made her feel happy. Was it really that satisfying? No, not at all. Although her laughter was shrill, it was full of vibrato. Although her eyes were wide open, they were empty and lifeless. Stripped of political power for life, death sentence. The man she hated the most, the man she couldn't wait to devour his blood and gnaw on his bones, was going to be executed by firing squad in 3 days. She should be happy. She should be happy. But why did she cry? Chapter 2996. Gone. The family she had been guarding was gone. She didn't even have a home anymore. Her only daughter had never come to visit her after she left, as if she had forgotten about her mother. She didn't know where her daughter had gone, and her ex-husband had been executed 3 days later. She had lost all the glory and wealth she had wanted. She had also lost the life she had wanted. She had nothing left. It was over, everything was over. Sun Dongqing's laughter became louder and sharper, and her tears flowed even more violently. The 2 female bailiffs didn't give her a chance to speak again. They took her for both sides and left the court. She is Yi Zhifan's first wife, Sun Dongqing, and also the younger sister of the martyr, Sun Xueqing. Principal Chun, who was sitting in the audience, lowered his head and said to Chief Engineer Fu, who was sitting next to him, in a low voice, "They share the same mother. One is in heaven, and the other is on earth." There weren't many people in a closed court session. There were only 6 people in the audience, including Principal Chun, Chief Engineer Fu, and a representative from the military. Chief Engineer Fu Yuxing, looked at Sun Dongqing, who was being dragged away, with cold eyes. His daughter had been tortured by her aunt, who was also her aunt. She had been beaten and scolded. She hadn't had a good day, and she had been framed for being indecent. Was she really Hongmei's younger sister? Her enemy was nothing more than this. Thinking of what he had heard from Principal Chun in the past few days, Chief Engineer Fu's heart was in pain. His daughter had said that although she had suffered a little when she was young, the children in the village were all the same. Living under someone else's roof wasn't a big deal. After all, it wasn't her home, and she didn't want anything. She had mentioned it lightly, with a faint smile in her eyes and mouth. He had thought that it was nothing more than that. After all, she had been living under someone else's roof. He hadn't dared to ask who she had been living under or what kind of hardship she had suffered when she was young. At that time, he had seen that his daughter didn't want to talk about it. Since she didn't want to talk about it, he didn't ask. Now he knew that his daughter didn't want to talk about it because she was afraid that he would be sad and blame himself. Although her uncle wasn't her biological uncle, her aunt was her biological aunt. But in the end, his daughter was tortured by her aunt to the point that even her schooling became a problem. Fortunately, Principal Chun, Uncle Jin, Political Commissar Yin, and retired regiment commander Liu helped his daughter to continue her studies. Furthermore, Commander-in-Chief Xia's son, Xia Jinyuan, helped to prevent his daughter from being ruined by them. Yi Jifan will be announcing his verdict. Sun Dongxing's verdict will be announced tomorrow or the day after. Her problem isn't as serious as Yi Jifan's. She didn't take anyone's life, nor was she directly involved in corruption or bribery. I've consulted a lawyer. At most, she'll be sentenced to 5 to 8 years in prison. Principal Chun thought that Sun Dongxing's sentence was too light, but she really didn't have any crimes that could lead to a sentence of decades or a death sentence. Even if she had objections, she couldn't bypass the law. And Yi Qian's father, Chief Engineer Fu, didn't look like the kind of person who would abuse his power for personal gain. Therefore, he would definitely follow the law. Chief Engineer Fu naturally hated Sun Dongxing. When he heard this, he clenched his fists and said in a deep voice, "She didn't commit any major crimes, nor did she take anyone's life. It's normal for her to be sentenced to 5 to 8 years. That's all we can do. Follow the law and punish her according to the law." He couldn't interfere. If he interfered, he could definitely sentence her to more than 15 years. Principal Chin knew that he couldn't take advantage of his position. Although he was a little unwilling, he thought about it. Follow the law and punish her according to the law. She didn't break the law and didn't overstep her authority. Even if he was unwilling, he felt at ease. Chapter 2997. Let's leave it at that, Brother Fu. Yi Jifan has been executed and Sun Dongxing has been sentenced. This family has received the punishment they deserve. When Sun Dongxing is done with her work, let's tell her the good news and let her be happy. Principal Chin's voice became lighter when he mentioned Yi Qian. Let's leave it at that. At least they were punished and did not escape the law. Chief Engineer Fu nodded slightly. Yi Jifan's death sentence was just the beginning. There were more shocking things to come. There was no need to rush. His daughter had said that they were not in a hurry. The military commission and the military would investigate at the same time. The murderer who killed his wife, Hong Mei, would definitely be brought to justice. Chief Engineer Fu could not tell Principal Chin about this. The military commission had contacted him secretly. His wife's death involved a wide range of people. There was only one murderer, but there was a huge net behind the murderer. He could not move or alert anyone. Once the news was leaked, all his previous efforts would be wasted. The sacrifice of a martyr involved a wide range of people. This was no longer a personal matter. It was a national matter. Without Sun Dongxing's sharp and crazy laughter, the court regained its solemn silence. Yi Jifan did not look at Sun Dongxing. Even though Sun Dongxing was cursing at him, he did not want to look at her. He did not want to look at her. Looking at her would only make him hate her even more. He was a criminal who would be executed soon. Why should he add more troubles to himself in the remaining 3 days? Yi Jifan did not look at Sun Dongxing. Instead, he looked at the audience a few times. When he walked into the court, he noticed that Principal Chun was sitting in the audience. Beside Principal Chun was a middle-aged man with an extraordinary aura. On the left side of the middle-aged man were a few soldiers in military uniform. He did not pay much attention to the soldiers and Principal Chun. However, he took a few glances at the middle-aged man who looked vaguely familiar. It seemed like He had seen him before, but he also felt like he had never seen him before. He looked familiar, but he was sure that he had never seen him before. Otherwise, with this man's extraordinary aura, he would definitely remember him and never forget him. Who was this person? Just as Yi Jifan was being escorted back to prison, he turned back to look at the familiar middle-aged man. The middle-aged man had already stood up. His back was straight, and his eyes were clear. He had a very familiar aura about him. A soldier. This middle-aged man was a soldier. In a split second, Yi Jifan thought of another young face from that vaguely familiar face. Yi Qian. Yi Qian's features were extremely similar to this middle-aged man's. As if thinking of a certain possibility, Yi Jifan, who had been secretly sizing them up, suddenly narrowed his eyes. His numb expression finally cracked, revealing a look of shock. This was Yi Qian's father, his real, biological father. In an instant, Yi Jifan thought of Chief Engineer Fu's identity and guessed his relationship with Yi Qian. It was Yi Qian's father. He actually saw Yi Qian's father. A soldier. Yi Qian's father was also a soldier. Yi Jifan, who had followed the bailiff for a few steps, suddenly stopped. He raised his head to look at the judge who had yet to leave. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Your Honor, may I request to speak for a while? I would like to ask the gentleman in the audience a few things. I only have 2 questions." He only asked these 2 questions and left immediately after. Chapter 2998. The judge calmly looked at the prisoner and then looked at the audience. Before the judge could speak, Chief Engineer Fu spoke. "You have already looked at me several times. Since you want to ask me a question, then ask. Are you Yi Qian's father?" Yi Jifan asked. Soon, he heard the answer that he had guessed. The middle-aged man used a cold voice to answer him. It was only one word, but it confirmed his guess. Yes. Chief Engineer Fu only replied with one word. Didn't they say that his daughter was an orphan? Her mother had indeed sacrificed herself, but her father was still alive. Let's see who would dare to say that his daughter was an orphan. Then you're also a soldier, right? Yi Jifan asked again. Yes. Chief Engineer Fu still only replied with one word. He didn't want to say more. If he said more, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to resist the urge to beat up this bastard who had tortured his daughter. Yi Jifan's body trembled slightly. Although he had already guessed it, hearing it with his own ears, he couldn't help but be shocked. Yes, he should have thought of it earlier. Sun Xueqing was a soldier. When she came back from a visit, there were rumors that she was pregnant. She was in a hurry to get married because she was pregnant with a bastard. That was why she married Yi Xinfan. Since Sun Xueqing came back pregnant, then she must have gotten pregnant in the army. If she could get pregnant in the army, the man she found must also be in the army. He actually didn't think of this point. He didn't expect to see Yi Qian's father here. He didn't expect Yi Qian's father to appear here. Why did Yi Qian suddenly suspect that Sun Xueqing's death was related to the Yi family? Why did she suddenly become a different person in the second year of junior high school? Could it be that she found her biological father at that time? No. It should be that her biological father found Yi Qian. Therefore, when the crippled Yi Qian found someone to rely on and learned how to resist, how to retaliate, how to protect himself, how to find Uncle Jin, and how to find the army. As he thought about it, Yi Jifan felt as if the clouds had cleared and the sky was clear. No wonder. It turned out that her biological father had come looking for her, allowing an orphan girl to suddenly have a military father by her side. Yi Qian was influenced. He started to work hard under the guidance of his biological father. Little by little, he suppressed Ying while she gradually shone brightly. Therefore, he did not lose to Yi Qian, but to this middle-aged man who had been guiding Yi Qian but had never shown himself. Ha. So that's how it is. Every time he and old Madame Yi went to Yi Qian, they would tell her that she had no parents. If she didn't even want a last family, then she would be a rootless duckweed in this world that anyone could bully. At that time, Yi Qian must have been very amused. No family? Her biological father had come looking for her. So how could she not have a family? Yi Jifan had never been able to figure out why Yi Qian suddenly changed. At this moment, he felt that he had finally found the answer. Yi Qian's backer was none other than her father, who was a military man. He had asked the two questions, and he had also found the answer to the riddle that had been troubling him. He no longer cared about the outside world. Since he already knew the outcome, he would rather laugh than cry. Chapter 2999. As for his only daughter, Sun Ying, Yi Jifan had long acted as if he didn't have this daughter. Yi Qian once said that Yi Jifan was a person who could even abandon his family for his own sake. She wasn't wrong. Yi Jifan was indeed such a person. The numb Yi Jifan smiled. The chains on his ankles dragged on the ground, making a hua 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 sound. Every step he took, he laughed. The heavy iron door behind him closed, closing Yi Jifan's freedom and also cutting off his life. Chief Engineer Fu walked out of the courtroom and stood on the high steps of the courtroom. He raised his head and looked at the sunset sky. At 5:30 in the afternoon in Nan Province, the sun had already set in the west. The sky had beautiful burning clouds, so beautiful that people couldn't help but stop and admire. Although Chief Engineer Fu stopped and looked up at the sky, his mind had already flown far away. On the day he was secretly taken away from the army, the sunset also filled the sky. The colors were gorgeous, like an oil painting sprinkled with gold powder. It was so beautiful that he wanted to take a picture and develop it as a souvenir. At that time, he didn't want to leave and never return. He had betrayed his most beloved wife and also his daughter, who he didn't know had suffered. Leaving for several years, when he came back, things remained the same, but people had changed. "Brother, I want to go to Xiang City to see my daughter. I want to go see her." Chief Engineer Fu retracted his gaze and looked at Principal Chun, who had specially accompanied him. Even if he wasn't wearing a military uniform, the towering temperament that belonged to a soldier couldn't be concealed by casual clothes. Principal Chun, who had once again served the army, was the same. Hearing this, Principal Chun smiled and said, No, this time I can't accompany you. I still have to return to the team. Tomorrow morning, I have to lead the team into the mountains to train. I can't accompany you." As the chief instructor of the sniper base, Principal Chin's days were very fulfilling. Chief Engineer Fu, who was anxious to see his daughter, smiled. Then he talked for a while with the representative sent by the military discipline, who came out a step later. He politely thanked the invitation for a meal and took a taxi straight to the airport. Unfortunately, Father Fu hurriedly rushed to Xiang City and was destined to return disappointed. Yi Qian was not on duty at the school. He was still competing in Estonia, so Father Fu could not see him even if he wanted to. It was 12:30 in the afternoon in Estonia. The Chinese team members who received the second mission had already walked for half an hour and found the entrance to their second mission. He passed through the dark river and arrived at the venue of the Flying Dagger competition. The underground river was not long, but because it was an underground river, even if it was only 5 kilometers long, it was enough to make people uneasy. "Let's share a safety rope and lock it tightly. We'll go down the river together." Xia Jinyuan threw out a safety rope that could withstand a pulling force of 400 kilograms and ordered his comrades to fasten it with a lock. He then led the way and entered the underground river in a single file. After a series of small sounds, the comrades immediately carried out the task. They did not have much time left. There were still 5.5 hours before the end. In 5.5 hours, they still needed to complete a freelance surgery subject. The last stage was the finale. Without too much time to delay, Xia Jinyuan quickly fastened the safety rope with a lock and led the team into the entrance of the underground river. The moment they stepped into the water, the cold air of the river was like fine needles that pierced straight into their bones. It was too cold. It was simply ice water. Xia Jinyuan, who was the first to go down, did not stop. He stepped down and lifted his foot again to step forward. Even if the cold was bone-chilling, they had to continue. There was no turning back for an arrow that had been shot. They also had no turning back. Chapter 3000. Yi Qian was the fifth to enter the water. Her right foot was the first to enter the water. Without any hesitation, she stepped her left foot into the water as well. The depth of the water was just above her knees. The cold water of the underground river directly stimulated the wounds on her knees. As the cold continued, the wounds became numb from the cold. The water of the underground river had a certain degree of impact. The water went from knee-deep to waist-deep. It was very, very cold. It was so cold that it felt like even the strands of hair were about to freeze. It was so cold that even the blood flow had lost its warmth. When the blood flowed back to the heart, even the heart that should have been warm was cold. It's deep water now. There are still two. Before Xia Jinyuan could say the word deep, he immediately changed his words. Lean to the right. After saying that, he forcefully moved his hands to the right. The water on the right. It's warm? The water has become warm? Yao Zi, who was following behind him, exclaimed his discovery. That's right. The cold water of the underground river had a warm current flowing into it. The temperature was quite high, turning the bone-chilling cold water into a warm current. This was hot spring water. Only hot spring water could have such an effect. After walking 3 kilometers in the cold water for about 40 minutes, they were so cold that their lips had turned dark purple. If they continued walking like this, they would definitely suffer from the cold. However, even though they knew that their bodies would suffer from the cold, they still had to continue walking. Now, the cold water of the underground river had merged with the hot spring water and became very warm. In a short while, the 8 Special Forces soldiers with dark purple lips felt warm all over. Even their lips returned to normal. The lights on their helmets illuminated the dark underground world. Amidst the sound of flowing water, the Special Forces soldiers whose limbs were sore from soaking in the water began their final sprint. They could already see the light in front of them. That was the exit of the underground river. Gradually, the water became less warm. When they were about to reach the exit, the temperature of the river dropped even more rapidly. The warmth was gone, and it became bone-chilling cold again. Xia Jinyuan climbed onto the rock with both hands and stepped on Yao Zi's shoulders. With the help of Big Shark and G3, his tall and slender body finally managed to climb up. He tied the safety rope to a sturdy pine tree. Then his comrades who were still in the water held onto the rope tightly with both hands. Their legs stepped on the uneven surface of the rock, and they climbed up to the shore one by one. There were traces of footsteps on the shore. These were the footprints left behind by the participating special forces. The Chinese team members also left a trail of footprints for the SFS border guards to see. After watching for a few minutes, Sha stopped looking at the footprints. The footprints were too messy, and there was no way to tell how many teams had passed through here on their way to the flying knife field. Knife throwing was also a very difficult event. The team members were required to use standard daggers. While they were moving, they had to accurately throw the daggers at a human target that was 10 meters away from them. For example, if the military officer said arm, then the team members would immediately throw the standard dagger in their hands and stab the human target's arm. Not only did one need to have sharp eyes and fast hands, they also needed a high degree of concentration. At the same time, they also needed the perfect coordination of their hands, feet, and brain. At the military official's command, the standard dagger in his hand was immediately thrown, hitting the target that the military official had mentioned. This was a new subject that had only been introduced this year. It had never been done before. Therefore, when the first few teams arrived, they couldn't help but scratch their heads. Chapter 3001. When the Chinese team members arrived, there were obvious signs that the human target had been thrown. Xia Jinyuan paused in his steps as he glanced at the several daggers scattered around the human target. He slowly looked down and saw some standard daggers hidden in the cracks between the rocks of different sizes. When he saw this, Xia Jinyuan could not help but raise his eyebrows. They were all thrown away. It looked like the difficulty was not ordinary. Throwing the standard dagger while moving wasn't too difficult. The difficult part was that you had to immediately throw the dagger in your hand whenever the military officer told you the position. You couldn't pause for more than 3 seconds. That was the hardest part. Xia Jinyuan did not even ask how many teams had passed before them or what their results were. From the daggers that had fallen to the ground, it could be seen that their results were not good. Each person was only given 4 standard daggers. They had to throw the daggers at the head, chest, waist, thigh, and arm respectively. If they hit any of the daggers, they would get 0. 5 points. The 8 of them would have 32 standard daggers, so they would get a total of 16 points. 16 points. It was a lot of points, so it was very tempting. However, the difficulty was also not ordinary. I'll test the waters first. The great shark raised his hand and recommended himself. I like to play darts in the team, so I'll give it a try first. You guys can see if there's anything you need to improve on. Be careful when you go on stage. Li Jinyin said calmly. The rules are for 2 people to go on stage at the same time. I'll go. The T6 combatant raised his hand with excitement in his eyes. Good Lord. He had never played darts before. He had to give it a try first. Xia Jinyuan stopped in his tracks and turned around to signal for the T6 combatant to go forward. He had wanted to say that he would go first, but since the T6 combatant had raised his hand, he would let him go first. The 8 of them quickly reported to the military official who would be in the first group and who would be in the second group. Yi Qian and Xia Jinyuan were in the 4th group. Li Jinyin and Big Eel were in the 3rd group. G3 and Sparrowhawk were in the 2nd group, and T6 and the Great Shark were in the 1st group. From a distance of 10 meters, they had to give instructions quickly, and they had to throw the daggers immediately. The 4 daggers took 8 minutes to throw, but the Great Shark only scored 0. 5 points in the first round. Even with such a result, the military official still applauded. Damn, even the expressionless Li Jinyin couldn't help but curse in his heart. It really wasn't an ordinary level of difficulty. The exercise was not to move around on the spot, but to run a 50-meter sprint. The military officer standing at the finish line would immediately give the order when the team members were close to the finish line, and the team members would immediately throw the darts. The stopping position must be the designated position. The throwing distance of the flying dagger must not be shortened. Once it crosses the line, a flying dagger will be destroyed. In the second round, G3 and Young Sparrowhawk were in the second group. Both of them got 0. 5 points. Another round of applause rang out, louder than before. Yi Qian pursed his lips and asked the silent man beside him, "Don't tell me the previous contestants all got 0 points?" The applause is getting louder and louder. No, the people in front of us are all top-notch special forces. Their strength is among the best in the world. They won't get 0 points, but they will get fewer points. As for the applause, just listen to it. Xia Jinyuan replied with a faint smile. His cold gaze was fixed on his comrade in the 3rd round. After he finished speaking, the corners of his mouth slightly tightened. Demon King Li and Big Eel were up. The 2 of them, how many points could they get? The 3rd round ended. Demon King Li got 1 point, and Big Eel got 0. 5 points. After the 6 team members finished throwing, they only got a total of 3 points. It's very difficult. No wonder there are so many flying daggers scattered in the cracks of the rocks. Yi Qian, who was up on the field, muttered softly. He took 4 standard daggers from the military official and jogged to the 50-meter starting point with Xia Jinyuan. They prepared for the last round of throwing daggers. Chapter 3002. It was another 50-meter start. As the Estonian soldiers waved their flags, Yi Qian and Xia Jinyuan started running at the same time. When they were about to reach the 50-meter finish line, both of them slowed down at the same time and quickly adjusted their breathing. Actually, they couldn't run that fast anymore. There were less than 5 hours left until the 5 days and 4 nights. Over the past few days, they hadn't had more than 15 hours of rest. They had to run through the forest with their backpacks every day and constantly face the possibility of being chased by imaginary enemies. They hadn't eaten a full meal, hadn't had a good night's sleep, and hadn't even dried their clothes once. Their bodies and minds had been tortured to the point that they had lost their vitality. Their only motivation was to persevere for their dignity and honor. The military officer gave the order. Both of them threw their standard daggers at the same time. Before they had time to check if they had hit the head, the military officer gave the order again, this time at the left chest. There was no time to aim and throw again. They pulled out their daggers, aimed at the left chest of the human target, and threw the daggers again. They returned to the 50-meter starting point and started running again. The waist was first, followed by the thighs. Yi Qian threw the daggers in her hands almost as soon as the military officer gave the order. Because of Wang Jin and the others in high school, Yi Qian was often asked by them to play a few rounds of darts. In order to train her eyesight, Uncle Chun made her continuously throw bullets every day. She had trained day after day to achieve her current results. Throwing daggers while running was indeed difficult. Yi Qian had never done it before, but they had all trained to shoot while running. They used the standard daggers in their hands as bullets. Once they aimed at the target, they would shoot without hesitation. Yi Qian never hesitated. As long as she thought it was possible, she would shoot immediately. As a sniper, she had to strike first to gain the initiative. Indecisiveness would only lead to trouble. This was what Principal Chun had told her personally. When the Chinese contestants left, the military officer and the referee were still applauding. A soldier was about to pull out a dagger from a human target when a military officer and the referee stopped him at almost the same time. Leave it. Let the contestants behind see how good our female soldiers are. Although it's difficult, as long as you have the ability, you can succeed no matter how difficult the subject is. Therefore, when the SFS Border Defense Force arrived, before Shaluk could say anything, he was asked by the referee to stand in front of Yi Qian's standard dagger target. The referee said to Shaluk in a very serious tone, "Lieutenant Colonel, I know that you will definitely say that it's very, very difficult. So, let me ask you to take a look at this. Look at the dagger stuck in it. Although it's very difficult, as long as you have the strength, you can still succeed." Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk listened and watched attentively. Then he nodded. "Yes, you're absolutely right. Although it's very difficult, as long as you have the strength, you can succeed." "Well then, it's time for us to succeed," he said confidently. Seeing this, the referee said sincerely, "I wish you all the best." "Thank you. We will work hard to get good results." Lieutenant Colonel Shaluk was very modest this time. He was very confident that he had learned his lesson. Before they finished the competition, he couldn't easily say that they would complete it beautifully. He had already lost face several times, and he didn't want to lose face again in case he heard the Chinese soldiers make fun of him. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.